Chapter 147 Guildhall. Cassie smiled, but then suddenly frowned and asked, "But, Sonny, how do we find her?" He thought for a few seconds, then shrugged. "I'm not sure. Follow the sounds of mayhem? This place is not that big. I'm sure we'll manage." They descended the stairs and entered the slum, with Sonny looking around in search of the distinct tall figure. There weren't that many sleepers in the outer settlement who possessed an armor-type memory, so he was sure of his ability to notice Changing Star in a crowd. Soon they were surrounded by makeshift hovels and people that had empty, bleak eyes. Some of them stared at them with pity, realizing that the two had just been sent away from the castle. Others openly gloated. Sonny paid them no attention. Once again, he was surprised by the sharp contrast between the castle and the outer settlement. No matter how vile the underside of the ancient stronghold was, people were actually living there, walking around with mostly mundane human worries written on their faces. Here in the slum, people were merely existing, and barely at that. In their eyes, there was a more dire need and more consummate fear. The need to find food for the day, the fear of being devoured by some unseen monster in the night. They were all cold, gaunt, and listless. The only time hope appeared on their faces was when their gazes accidentally fell on the bright castle. "Hope will get you killed, fools. You have it better here than the poor souls in the fortress." All in all, it was not so different from the outskirts, with the added terror of nightmare creatures waiting somewhere in the shadows. But then there were monsters in the real world as well. They just wore human skin. Sonny was once again reminded of how surprisingly well prepared he was for the trials of the nightmare spell, his lack of education not included. Surprisingly, there was no sign of Nephis anywhere. They walked through the entire settlement before finally catching the glimpse of her. At the very edge of the slum, perched precariously above the vertical fall from the stone platform, stood an uncharacteristically spacious dwelling. It was crudely put together out of slabs of stone that had been unceremoniously scavenged from the ruins, with many of them still bearing the intricate carvings left behind by the original inhabitants of the Dark City. This barbarous atrocity was the closest to the road of white stone out of the entire outer settlement. Perhaps that was why it seemed to be a bit sturdier than the rest of the hovels. The lodge even had a small addition built on top of it, somewhat resembling a second story. Changing Star was sitting on its roof with her legs crossed, gazing at the rising sun and the cursed city below. In the pale light of dawn, her ivory skin and silver hair looked beautiful and eerie. She had dismissed her armor and was wearing a crude tunic, with a piece of rope tied around her waist. Sensing their approach, Nephis turned her head and glanced in their direction. Then she stood up and jumped down, landing lightly on the stone surface of the vast platform. Sonny grinned. "Hey, Neph! Long time no see!" Nephis led them inside the stone lodge, which had turned out to be her new residence. The interior was Spartan and austere, with pieces of broken furniture lying here and there, and cold winds sweeping freely through the spacious hall of the first floor. Despite its larger size and superior craftsmanship, the lodge had been empty when she had found it. No one wanted to live this close to both the edge of the platform at the threshold of the road, where the risk of being attacked by nightmare creatures was the highest. But Changing Star didn't mind. Looking around, Sonny scoffed. "Gee, this place surely needs some work." Neff shrugged, seemingly not very concerned with her living conditions. Well, they did spend the past 2 months sleeping on nothing but rocks and dirt, so in a sense, even this ramshackle mess was an enormous improvement. With some improvements, it could even become somewhat a decent place. Suddenly, Sonny felt a little guilty about all the comfort and warmth he had experienced in the castle. He was even fed delicious food, twice a day. Speaking of food, Cassie smiled and handed Neff a small bundle. Concerned about her friend, she had not eaten her supper the previous evening, choosing to save it for this moment. "Here, Neff, I brought you something to eat." Changing Star received the bundle with a faint smile and lingered a little before saying, "Thank you. Do you guys want breakfast?" With that, she walked over to a flimsy wooden table that stood near one of the walls and removed a piece of cloth from it. Beneath, there was a pile of juicy roasted meat. It was sizable enough to feed 10 people in the castle for a day or two. Sonny stared at the meat blankly, then moved his eyes to stare at Nephis. Where the hell did you get all this meat? We thought you'd be starving here in the outer settlement. She touched her hair in embarrassment. Oh, a few nights ago, a big monster came from the road. I and a few other people managed to kill it. This is my share of the spoils. Cassie opened her eyes wide. But I thought that Gunlaug's men were supposed to fight off nightmare creatures. Changing Star remained silent for a few seconds. They do if the castle is attacked, either from the slopes of the hill or from the sky. If the monsters come from the road, they usually don't bother to do anything. So that's why all the nearby hovels were empty. Who would want to live in the direct path of attacking nightmare creatures, especially since people who were supposed to fight them weren't going to move a finger to help? Sonny smiled darkly. That's the glorious castle guard for you. Wait. He blinked, then glared at Nephis. If that is true, then why on earth, dream realm, would you choose to live in this pit of all places? She stared at him for a while, then said in a flat tone, It's quiet here. Then a small smile appeared on Neff's lips. Turning to a window, she added, I like it. Chapter 148 Last Harvest. Behind the window, a striking vista of the cursed city sprawled far below. The morning sun washed the ruins in a pale light, making them look menacingly mysterious. Nevis smiled. Besides, what can compete with this killer view? As though answering her words, a ghastly wail resounded from somewhere far away, echoing in the wind like a dying scream. Sonny trembled. I guess she meant it literally. With a sigh, he put Changing Star's strange choice of habitat at the back of his mind and appreciated the pile of meat. Let's eat first. The three of them sat on the stone floor and ate monster meat, passing around Cassie's beautiful glass bottle between each other. It was just like the good old times, provided that those times weren't actually that old, and there had certainly not been anything good about them. Almost. When all three of them were satiated, Nephis looked at Sonny with calm intensity. For some reason, he was reminded of the unseen waves of pressure that Gunlau created anywhere he went. What have you learned in the castle? He sighed. This was going to be a long conversation. Sonny started by describing the general order of things in the ancient stronghold. He told Neff about the 6 different castes and the complex relationships that existed between them, as well as briefly explaining how the members of each caste lived their lives. Sometimes Cassie would add a few details of her own. Changing Star frowned. Wait, did you say that there were 500 people living in the castle? Sonny gave her a nod. Yes, somewhere around that. Why? She thought for a bit, then said, That doesn't make sense. There are almost as many people here in the outer settlement, perhaps even more. That would put the human population of the Dark City at around 1,000. Most of them are fairly young, too. Which would mean that each year, hundreds upon hundreds of us are sent to the Forgotten Shore, with most somehow managing to survive and reach the Bright Castle. She paused. But I haven't seen a single sleeper of our crop here in the slum. As far as I know, we 3 are the only ones to come to the Dark City after the recent solstice. Sonny scratched the back of his head and said with reluctance, Actually, it's 4. Castor is also here. He's living comfortably in the castle. Nephis suddenly grew strangely animated. Castor of the Han Li clan? He is here? No need to be so enthusiastic, damn it. Sonny tried not to grimace. Yeah, he had been here pretty much this entire time. Actually, Castor told us that there were only 7 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore by the spell this year. Strange, I know. He paused for a few moments, and then added, Truth be told, I noticed this discrepancy as well. But there is an explanation. You see, there seems to be a pattern to how many people the spell sends here. 15 years ago, when a bunch of crazy humans first laid claim to the castle, there would be just a dozen or so newcomers each year. Then a few dozen. Then 100. In the past few years, it was several hundred each time. Sonny gestured at the 3 of them. Until this year, that is, when a mere 7 sleepers arrived. Since the spell is obsessed with the number 7, some people believe that this marks the end of a 14-year-long cycle and the first year of a new one. I think it's plausible. Changing Star thought for a bit, then asked, How does Castor know the total number of new arrivals? That was a good question, naturally, one that Sonny had asked himself many times before finally convincing himself to go find the handsome legacy and ask him directly. There's an artisan in the castle with a weird type of revelation ability. She can trace the general location of everyone a person had ever met. Castor paid her a bunch of soul shards to check if any of his acquaintances made it to the Forgotten Shore. She told him there were 6. Nephis was silent for a few moments, then simply said, "Continue." Sonny did. He briefly mentioned the main points of everything he had been able to learn, including all the vile crap he had to witness and his own thoughts on how things worked under the pristine white surface of the magnificent fortress. Inevitably, he had to describe how ingenious and unassailable Bright Lord's hold over the Dark City was. Cassie grew pale and quiet during his somber account. Changing Star's face grew darker and darker with each word. When he told her about the travesty of a trial that ended with Jubei's harrowing death and shared his own thoughts on how powerful the host truly was, the corners of her mouth turned downward. Finally, he came to the conclusion. "And that is why Gunlao can never be defeated. He controls every facet of life here, both material and abstract. Food, shelter, hope, fear. Everything comes under the purview of his authority, and his authority is absolute. Even power itself is his to give and take. Out here, Gunlaug might as well be considered a god." Nephis remained silent for a long time, and then quietly said, "He is not a god. He is just an impostor." Sonny chuckled. "In this hell, is there a difference?" She glanced at him sharply and gritted her teeth. After a few minutes spent in tense silence, Neff suddenly said, "Still, that only explains why Gunlao can't be overthrown in a rebellion. Why didn't anyone simply kill him in his sleep? Why didn't one of his lieutenants stage a coup? After all, this is how tyrants usually end, by the hand of their most trusted ally." Sonny smiled darkly. Well, that is because up until now, I only told you about his power as a ruler, which is, by all accounts, nothing short of terrifying. But his personal power?" He shivered, then added in a hoarse voice, "It's way, way worse." Chapter 149, Dark Diver. Sonny was silent for a while, then sighed. "Do you remember how Effie told us that he might as well be considered immortal? Well, she wasn't wrong. Apart from the fact that Gunlaug has probably absorbed more soul essence and has more experience fighting both Nightmare Creature and Awakened than anyone else on the Forgotten Shore, there's more to him than that." Nephis frowned. "Is his aspect ability uniquely powerful?" Sonny shook his head. "His aspect ability is that he is able to breathe and move with incredible speed underwater, but it is connected to what I'm about to tell you." He hesitated. "You see, Gunlaug came to the Dark City around 8 years ago. Since his ability was of no use in the ruins, he quickly became an outcast. From what I was able to learn, things were even darker in the castle back then. Strength decided everything, and anyone without strength wasn't even considered to be human." Sonny shuddered. He could imagine it vividly. This was by far the most cruel and bloody time in the history of the Bright Castle. Right after the last member of the original cohort to conquer the ancient stronghold had perished, and before Gunlaug took control, things balanced at the edge of madness for a while. Say what you want about the bastard, but at least he kept the humans here from turning into animals. Completely. Sonny continued. "But Gunlaug, he turned out to be mad even by those standards. Because he actually began to hunt in the Dark Sea." Changing Star blinked. "What?" He nodded. "Yes, at dusk he would dive from the city wall into the black water to scavenge the soul shards from the monsters of the labyrinth that were crushed by the flood, racing against the approaching horrors of the depths. And at dawn he would dive into the retreating sea to scavenge meat from the remains of creatures that the dwellers of the depths had killed and left behind." Nephis silently stared at him. They had met the abominable existences that hid beneath the black surface of the cursed sea twice, and each of these harrowing meetings had left scars on their souls and minds. To do so twice a day, every day, Gunlaug was indeed a madman. But he was also somewhat of a mad genius. Sonny took a deep breath. And this is how he turned from a desperate outcast into the Bright Lord. One day, Gunlaug was pulled away by a current and, once the sea disappeared, stumbled onto a mortally wounded, dying Leviathan. The creature was still alive, but just barely. Knowing that the carrion eaters of the labyrinth will soon come to feast on it, Gunlaug began cutting the meat of the creature's bones with his knife. He paused, then said in a strangely dark voice, "By chance, the Leviathan happened to die from its terrible wounds at that exact moment, and since Gunlaug's blade was the last thing to cut it, the spell happened to attribute the kill to him, and that kill happened to give him a memory. A wondrous golden armor that no human weapon can even scratch." No one really knew a lot about the dwellers of the depths, but Sunny and Nephis had once witnessed two Carapace Centurions retrieve two transcendent soul shards from the carcass of one of them, which meant that Gunlaug's armor-type memory was at least 3 ranks above the soul cores of every human on the Forgotten Shore. Almost every weapon-type memory they possessed was either of a dormant or awakened rank. Even if someone managed to kill a falling creature and acquire an ascended weapon from it, the weapon would most likely still be ineffective against the transcendent armor. And since that damn armor didn't have any openings, basically, Gunlaug was invincible. Sunny sighed. With that armor, he returned to the Dark City, gathered a few supporters, killed everyone who stood in his way, and took control of the castle. No one was able to threaten his reign ever since, and all those who've tried, well, their skulls are out there for everyone to see, swinging on chains above the gates of the castle. Nephis remained silent for a long time, staring at the floor. She seemed to be a bit disheartened. Finally, she asked, "What traits does the armor possess?" He shrugged. "Who knows? It's not like anyone who had the opportunity to learn that lived to tell the tale. The only widely known thing about the golden armor is that it's made out of some strange liquid metal and that it emanates a field of crushing psychic pressure. But even that is not entirely true. Actually, it only affects those who look at their reflection in the visor. Cassie wasn't affected at all." The blind girl raised an eyebrow, only now learning that everyone except for her always felt incredibly oppressed in Gunlaug's presence. For once, her terrible flaw gave her an advantage. It had also allowed Sunny to learn a valuable secret, but he had no time to be happy about it. The most important part of this conversation was drawing close. He had to convince Changing Star to abandon any idea of going against Gunlaug. Otherwise, all 3 of them were going to end up dead. Sunny looked at her and asked in a carefully neutral tone, "So, what do you think?" Changing Star was quiet for a while, then suddenly said, "I have also learned something while you were gone." Sunny frowned slightly. Was she trying to avoid this conversation? Feeling heavy and uncertain, he asked, "Really? What is it?" However, in the next second, he had forgotten all about his previous worries, because Nephis looked him right in the eyes and said, "There is a gateway here after all." Something exploded in Sunny's mind. What? There is a gateway? Stunned, he stared at Nephis with wide eyes. How could this be? Why hadn't anyone ever mentioned it? No, it didn't make any sense. If there was a gateway, why would people just stay in the Dark City? Why were both Effie and Castor so adamant that there was no way out? A familiar dark feeling of unease settled in his heart. Trying to compose himself, Sunny slowly said, "Then why hasn't anyone left? Where is it?" Nephis looked at the window, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered in a flat tone, "Where do you think? It's in the Crimson Spire, of course." Chapter 150 Hunting Party. The Crimson Spire, that eerie and ever-present shadow that had hunted him all this time. The Cyclopean tower that stood at the center of the labyrinth, or maybe was the source of it, emanating a harrowing sense of foreboding. The background for the last part of Cassie's vision. Of course, the damn gateway just had to be in that damn spire. Sunny sighed. This was unwelcomed but not unexpected news. After all, Inspector Rock did warn them that, should they ever find themselves in a region of the Dream Realm without an established human citadel, they should look for the gateway either around or inside the most prominent landmark there. The Crimson Spire loomed over the entire Forgotten Shore like an axis connecting heaven to earth. It was hard to imagine anything more prominent. Ever since Cassie had first told them about it, deep down, Sunny always suspected that they were going to end up having to enter that creepy tower at some point. After the revelation that there was no gateway in the human castle, that suspicion only grew stronger. But wait, there was something else that Instructor Rock had told them. Work together to defeat the Gateway Guardians. Wasn't these his words? So who is guarding the Crimson Spire? Glancing at Nephis, he asked darkly, "So, what is inside the spire? I gather that it's not something pleasant. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 1,000 sleepers choosing to live in a city full of vicious monsters instead of going there." Changing Star nodded. Without changing her expression, she looked away and answered, "A fallen terror." Sunny's heart skipped a bit. A fallen terror. The nightmare creature, one whole class above the dreaded tyrants, with 6 mighty soul cores providing it with profane power, would certainly do the trick. So, going there is suicide. No amount of sleepers could ever hope to defeat a fallen terror. The possibility of surviving such an encounter, let alone emerging victorious, was 0. It was even less probable than breaking through Gunlaug's indestructible armor. Impossible. He chuckled. What irony! To not only be trapped in this hell, but also be forced to stare at the path to freedom every day, knowing that you'll never be able to reach it. That was such a cruel torture. Sunny would even go as far to say that it was a type of hell in and of itself. No wonder the Tower of Dusk was so unpopular. Living there would simply drive some people insane. They were really, truly stuck here forever. Nephis sighed. The first ruler of the Bright Castle led a large expedition to find a way out of the labyrinth. They all perished. The second ruler, the last member of the original cohort, tried to reach the gateway instead. They all died, too. After that, no one tried to find a way out anymore. The 3 of them remained silent for a long time, their mood grim and somber. Now that they had a chance to spend some time in the small human enclave on the Forgotten Shore and gather information, there was no more excuses to deny it. Everything that Effie had told them was true. They were going to spend the rest of their lives here, however long that might be. Sunny sighed, then looked at Changing Star. "So, what's the plan?" Nephis looked at the vista of the ruined city through the window. Sunny was sure that she had already thought a lot about their future. He had hoped that her thoughts were not too crazy. After a while, she said, "We will create a hunting party." Not too bad. Despite the fact that becoming independent hunters was going to be a long and perilous journey, it was at least achievable. They just had to be smart and careful about it. He scratched the back of his head. Going into the Dark City blind would be very dangerous. Nephis shrugged, then turned to face him. "You are right. We will need to recruit a pathfinder. Someone who was already experienced and could teach them the ropes. That would certainly speed things along and make the whole process safer. Good thinking. Do you have someone in mind?" She gave him a nod. "As a matter of fact, I do. We will go see her later. But first—" Her eyes gleamed with intensity. "Tell me every detail of what you have learned in the castle. Every name, every aspect, every ability and flaw you've been able to glean. Every grievance people have and every agenda they're hiding. I need to know it all." Sunny smiled. "Sure, no problem. But be warned, this is going to take a while. I've been very busy snooping around, you know." The first time since receiving his aspect, Sunny had been able to do what he had planned to do from the start. Gather information without risking his hide, as a real spy should. After months of bloody battles and open confrontations, it was strangely rewarding. Changing Star gave him a nod. "There's no hurry." Several hours later, Sunny was finishing his whining report, his voice hoarse from all the talking. It is actually the same Pathfinder who the hunter from the outer settlement, Jubei, accused of using another human as monster bait. A real nasty fellow. He is an incredibly formidable fighter and is good at his job, but his personal habits, well, the man is a degenerate gambler. He spends all his shards in Aiko's gambling den, then refuses to pay and hurts anyone who dares to object. He took a breath, then added angrily, some people even say that this whole challenge happened because he wanted to hunt powerful monsters and may have a part of his gambling debt. The bastard. Then Sonny thought for a while, scratched his head, and said, I think that covers pretty much everything. Of course, there are a lot of things I wasn't able to learn at all. Nephis was deep in thought, digesting the mountain of information that Sonny had thrown at her. Her face was cold and distant. Feeling that her friend wasn't going to react, Cassie patted him on the shoulder, smiled, and said, You've done a very good job, Sonny. This is amazing. He blinked and looked aside, slightly embarrassed. Well, of course it is. That is what my aspect is actually for, remember? The whole monster-slaying thing is nothing but an unfortunate misuse of my talents, honestly. Yeah, I would much prefer to stay hidden somewhere safe and let my shadow do all the work. The shadow slightly turned its head and threw a menacing look his way. It was not amused. Sonny smiled, then looked at Nephis. So, who is this Pathfinder you want to recruit? There can't be a lot of experienced hunters in the outer settlement, right? And each of them must have their hunting party already. How are we going to persuade one to join us? Changing Star lingered, then said in a strangely tense voice, Yes, everyone who is worth something has their own party, except for one person. But persuading her won't be easy. She sighed, then added, Actually, you already know her. It's Effie. Chapter 151. Headhunting. Some time later, they were standing in front of a makeshift cabin. Just like Changing Star's patchwork dwelling, the cabin was constructed out of mismatched stone blocks that had been scavenged from the ruins. It was reinforced with monster hides here and there and seemed to be built slightly better than the rest of the hovels in the outer settlement. There was a large bestial skull hung above the door, its thick forehead split apart by a devastating strike of some sharp weapon. Glancing at the skull, Nephis took a step forward and knocked on the door. However, no response followed. Sonny sighed. Maybe she's not home. Instead of an answer, Changing Star frowned and banged on the door with her fist. The first strike was somewhat gentle, but by the last, the bestial skull was on the verge of flying off the wall. A sleepy and irritated voice sounded from the inside. I swear to gods, whoever you are, you'd better be a nightmare creature. A few moments later, Sonny heard the sounds of footsteps approaching the door. Before it opened, though, Nephis suddenly spoke. Sonny, turn away. Hearing her strange urgency in her voice, he scowled and did as she asked. Your shadow, too. What is going on? Are we expecting trouble? As he was staring away from the cabin, the creaking of wood informed him that the door was flung open. Who the hell is... Oh, it's you. He swore he could hear Neff's teeth grinding against each other. A few seconds later, Changing Star spoke, her tone especially flat. Put on a memory, Effie, please. Wait, what? Why would she... Oh. When he was finally allowed to turn back, the last glimmers of ethereal light were yet to disappear from the fabric of Effie's provocatively short chiton. She wasn't wearing anything underneath either. Here, better? The huntress was exactly the same as the last time he had seen her. Tall, strong, and brimming with vitality. Without the bronze cuirass with leather protrusions, as well as other elements of the archaic armor, even more of her olivey skin could be seen. So, you guys are back together, huh? Judging by how clean and shiny the other two look, I'm guessing that their stay in the castle was pleasant? Sonny glanced at Cassie, then said in a reserved tone, Not particularly. Just like you said, the ambience there is, well, an acquired taste, I guess. Effie grinned. Well said. Anyway, how can I help you? Changing Star motioned at the door. Can we come inside? The unruly huntress glanced back, then shrugged. Sure, why not? Inside, the cabin was small and cozy. One of its corners was occupied by a large pile of furs that served Effie as a bed. At first glance, it didn't seem that lavish, but once it hit Sonny that each of the furs had come from the corpse of a nightmare creature, he quickly changed his mind. This was probably the most extravagant thing he had ever seen. Also, one could only imagine what went on between those furs. Pure thought, Sonny, focus! There was also a fireplace, a table with a single wooden chair, and a pair of sturdy chests. The rest of this space was occupied by various curios that the hunters had scavenged from the ruins over the years. There was no particular logic to this opulent collection except for the fact that each object had once caught her fancy for this reason or that. After the three of them were seated, Effie returned to her pile of furs, wrapped herself in one of them, and asked, "So, what's so important that you had to come and wake me this early in the morning?" "Early in the morning? It's already noon." Nephis lingered for a few moments, and then said, "You haven't hunted since the day we met, right?" Effie yawned, then said in a languid tone, "Nope, I'll go back to the ruins once my food runs out, which will be in a day or two, I think." "What? How?" The amount of meat she had butchered off those monsters was enough to feed a person for a couple of months. It was all gone already? Just how much did that vigorous huntress eat? Changing Star nodded. "When you do, come with us. Be our pathfinder." Well, she certainly doesn't beat around the bush. For some reason, Sunny had not expected Neff to be this direct. He had always imagined this conversation taking much longer before getting it to a real purpose. Effie stared at them, then threw her head back and laughed out loud. "Ah, that's a good one. Do you want me to be your nanny too?" When her laughter died down, she shook her head and said, "No offense, kids, but you have just arrived in the Dark Sea. You are as green as it gets. Best hunters out here wanted me to become a part of their party, but I refused them all. Do you know why?" Neff nodded with a serious expression. "Most hunting parties share the spoils of their hunts. Each hunter keeps a part to eat and sells the rest to the people in the slum. But because of your flaw, you can't allow yourself to do the same. You need all the subsistence a hunt can provide. The more partners you have, the lesser your share will become. So, you hunt alone, and never sell the meat of your prey, just their hides." Effie smiled. "I see someone has been doing their homework." Changing Star tilted her head a little, and, not paying any attention to the irony in those words, continued, "We can solve that problem by—" However, the solitary huntress interrupted her. "Stop! Good guess, but you are wrong. That is not why I refused all those hunters." Nephis blinked, surprised. After a long pause, she asked, a hint of confusion in her voice, "Then, why?" The smile disappeared from Effie's face. "Because they are weak. Every one of them is weak. Even the most successful of them are. And do you know why?" Something dark gleamed in her hazel eyes. "They are weak because Gunlaug will never allow anyone strong to exist outside of his control. So, I am not going to be your pathfinder. Sorry, princess." Changing Star froze, obviously flustered by that answer. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again and awkwardly pressed her lips together. No matter how much she had honed her social skills during their journey through the labyrinth, this conversation still seemed to be too much for her. In the ensuing silence, Sunny suddenly spoke, his voice calm and slightly provoking. "He's allowing you to exist." Effie looked at him, raised one eyebrow with a smile, and didn't say anything. Finally, Nephis was able to compose herself. "We might be new here, but we are not weak. Between the two of us, Sunny and I had killed dozens upon dozens of awakened creatures in the labyrinth." The hunters interrupted her once again. "Even if that's true, that was there. Out here in the Dark City, things are very different." The two of them stared at each other, one with a relaxed smile on her lips, the other with stubborn flames burning in her eyes. "Oh, I don't like this." Eventually, Changing Star grimaced and said, "So, if we prove that we have strength, you might reconsider?" Effie chuckled. "Damn! You say it like it's easy. You do know how many people can't even step a foot into the ruins, right? If you guys survive in this hell for a few years, then maybe we can talk again." Nephis looked at her for a while, and then smiled darkly. "We will talk again in the evening. Then you will change your mind." Chapter 152. There and Back Again. Outside, the sun was already moving past its zenith. There wasn't much time left before the sun set, so Sunny was really unsure about what Nephis could do to change Effie's mind before evening. However, judging by the determined expression on her face, Changing Star wasn't just throwing words to the wind. She had something specific in mind. He hesitated. "So, what exactly are we going to do now?" Neff glanced at him, white flames dancing in the depths of her cold gray eyes. There she turned away and said, "Follow me." With that, she walked forward in the direction of the castle. "Castle? Why are we going to the castle?" Somewhat uneasy, Sunny gently took Cassie by the arm and hurried to catch to Nephis. When he did, she suddenly threw her over her shoulder. Tell me about that Pathfinder again, the one who was accused of murder 3 days ago. Sunny frowned, then repeated what he knew about the guy. When he was almost finished, she asked, What's his aspect ability? He hesitated, then said, He can make any weapon become incredibly sharp when it's in his hands. Sharp enough to cut stone, maybe, even steel. It's a very powerful combat ability. Changing Star was quiet for some time, then said, What about his flaw? Sunny shook his head. That I have no idea about. People are very protective of their flaws, you know. Not everyone goes around telling everyone about their greatest vulnerability like that lunatic Effie. Cassie, who seemed to be very protective of him today, decided to support his claim. Sunny's right, Neff. We don't even know what his own flaw is, remember? Sunny almost stumbled and had to try very hard to not let any emotion show on his face. Cassie was right, of course. All Changing Star and she had shared their flaws with him, Sunny never reciprocated the gesture, for obvious reasons. That is true, but, can we not talk about that? Nephis silently nodded and didn't comment on it further. It seemed as though her mind was on something else. Phew. As soon as they scaled the magnificent stairs and were approaching the gates of the castle, Sunny was growing increasingly nervous about Neff's intentions. What is her plan exactly? Neff, what do you need us to do? She shrugged, then said in her usual indifferent tone. You don't really need to do anything. Just follow me and try to look, virtuous. Look virtuous? What is that supposed to mean? The guards standing watch in front of the gates blocked their path with contemptuous and suggestive looks in their eyes. Contempt was directed towards Sunny, while the rest was directed towards the girls, of course. Stop! What business do you have in the Bright Castle? Want to pay the tribute? Or maybe want to get paid instead, if you know what I mean. Both of them laughed, making Sunny's blood boil. Nephis looked at them with a calm expression, then said, I want to go inside, but I'm not going to pay the tribute. The laughter suddenly stopped. The guards looked at them with a bit of amusement, a harsh and dangerous light finding its way into their eyes. Have you lost your mind, wench? Why are you here if you're not going to pay tribute? Stop wasting our time. Changing Star stared at them with no emotion whatsoever showing on her beautiful ivory face. Then she said evenly, I'm here to invoke the right of challenge. For a few seconds, everyone stayed silent. Sunny's heart was beating like a wild beast in his chest. Mad! She has gone mad! But no, Changing Star was not mad. Although Sunny liked to joke inwardly about how crazy Nephis was, she was anything but. In fact, her ability to remain cool-headed and rational in any situation was one of the main reasons that made her so dangerous, which meant that there was some opportunity she saw here that he didn't. At least, he hoped this was the case. Meanwhile, one of the guards frowned. Stop joking around, little girl. Shut your mouth and get lost if you want to live. Neff didn't move. Instead, she said, I'm not joking. The other guard stared at her, then shook his head. Those slum rats really have all gone crazy, huh? I thought that this recent show would teach them a lesson, but it seems as though it did not. He sneered. Listen, lass, the right of challenge is not a laughing matter. It's a fight to the death. No one is going to go easy on you just because you have a pretty face. Do you understand? Changing Star simply nodded. The guard waited for a while, looking at her tall figure and the crude tunic that she wore. Then he grimaced. I guess we'll have some entertainment today. Oh, what a shame. With your looks, you could have lived in the castle without even needing to pay the tribute. Shaking his head, he turned around and gestured for the three of them to follow. The other guard stayed behind, a bewildered and darkly excited expression on his face. With the sound of the rusty chain swinging in the wind invading their ears, Sunny, Nephis, and Cassie passed beneath the hanging skulls and entered the castle. Inside, everything was exactly the same. Even Harper was still sitting behind his opulent desk, writing something on a piece of parchment. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he raised his head and threw a furtive glance in their direction. An expression of confused surprise appeared in his eyes. Sunless and Cassia? What are you guys doing back here? Sunny felt the desire to palm his face. When he had said to the gaunt young man that they might see each other in the future, he certainly did not mean that the future would be on the same damn day. Not knowing about the thoughts raging in his head, Harper smiled. Oh, did you guys get lucky and come into some shards? Back already to pay the tribute? Sunny gritted his teeth and forced out a weak smile. No, not exactly. Chapter 153 Guiding Star. By the time the three of them were led to the grand hall of the castle, the news that there was going to be another challenge had yet to spread through the entire fortress. Because of that, there was no crowd there, just a few dozen people who had happened to walk past and heard the commotion. However, their number was growing with each minute. Standing before the entrance to the hall, Nephis was calmly looking forward, her thoughts a mystery. She seemed to be steady and collected. Sunny, on the other hand, was very nervous. Just what was Changing Star planning? Glancing around to make sure that no one could eavesdrop on their conversation, he leaned to her and whispered, "You're not really going to fight one of Gunlaug's lieutenants, are you?" Because that would be suicide. No matter how talented and strong Neff was, she couldn't hope to win against someone like that. At least not before absorbing enough soul shards to even the odds at least a little. Those people had not gotten to where they were by pure accident, too. They had talents of their own. Nephis didn't turn her head and simply said, "The walls have ears." Sunny gritted his teeth and was about to retort, but at that moment the guard that had led them inside appeared from the grand hall, threw them a dark look, and spat. "Come on in, fools." Changing Star simply walked forward, leaving Sunny and Cassie no choice but to follow. Inside the hall, a small crowd of people was staring at the entrance. When they saw Nephis, a wave of confused whispers ran through their ranks. "Who is that? Never seen her before. There's something strange about that girl." The whole situation was much less ostentatious and theatrical than that on the day of Jubei's death. Most of the lieutenants weren't even here, not to mention the Bright Lord himself. Only the leader of hunters, Gemma, was sitting on top of the steps leading up to the empty white throne. On his face there was a slightly sullen expression. To Sunny's relief, Horace was nowhere to be seen. When the guard led the three of them inside, Gemma raised his head and glanced in their direction with a frown. "Did I hear it correctly? One of you three wants to invoke the right of challenge." Nephis took a step forward, looked him right in the eyes, and answered in her usual indifferent voice, "I do." Her calmness was in direct contradiction with the heavy meaning behind those words. It was the polar opposite of the impassioned, scornful, furious speech of condemnation that Jubei had given in this hall 3 days ago. The confused frown on Gemma's face deepened. "You do know what that means, right, little girl?" She continued to stare at him without showing any sign of fear, then repeated, "I do." The tall hunter sighed. "Listen, it is indeed true that anyone has the right to invoke the right of challenge, but throwing your life away is a really stupid thing to do. I'm sure that you had to suffer a lot to make it this far. Everyone here did, pretty much. So, how about you think about it some more and reconsider?" His voice wasn't unfriendly. In fact, it seemed sincere, as though Gunlaug's lieutenant really did not want to see her die for no reason. However, his words fell on deaf ears. Neff just tilted her head a little and said, "No need." Gemma sighed again, then shook his head. "Fine, have it your way then. Who are you here to accuse?" Sunny already had the idea. That's why he wasn't surprised to hear her next words. "I am here to accuse the Pathfinder known as Andal." Andal was the person whose crimes had led to Jubei's challenge and then death. As another wave of whispers rose from the crowd, Gemma blinked. With an unhappy scowl on his face, he said, "As I've told the last time, I'm the leader of both hunters and pathfinders. Any crime they commit while performing their duties is my crime, so I will be the one to answer for it. Are you sure you want to answer me, kid?" Sunny held his breath, knowing that Neff's next words would decide their fates. Despite the older man's heavy tone, she did not even flinch. However, she did pierce him with a cold gaze, then slowly shook her head. "I am not here to accuse him of murdering the young man from the outer settlement. I am here to accuse him of theft. Andal has lost a considerable amount of soul shards while gambling, but refused to pay. That is stealing. Since it was done on his private time and not while performing any official duties, you have nothing to do with it." Gemma stared at her, a bewildered look written clearly on his face. Sunny was doing the same. Well, that was unexpected. Kind of ingenious, actually. Who knew Neff could be so crafty? By shifting the accusation from a crime committed during a hunt to a misdemeanor that had nothing to do with Andal's role as a pathfinder, she effectively prevented any of the lieutenants from fighting on his behalf, at least if they remained true to their claim of being just. But was a seasoned Pathfinder any less of a threat than one of Gunlaug's proxies? And would Gemma even allow a challenge like that to proceed? As though responding to his questions, the tall hunter raised his eyebrows and said in disbelief, "What? A gambling debt? You want to... Did Aiko send you?" Nephis shook her head again. "No, I've never even met her." Everyone in the Grand Hall looked at her as though she was insane. The charismatic lieutenant was no exception. With some exasperation finding its way into his voice, he asked, "If you don't even know the person Andal owes the shards, why are you challenging him on her behalf?" Neff simply shrugged. "Do I need to personally know the victim of the crime to punish the criminal?" Gemma stared, clearly finding the whole situation ridiculous. "It's just a gambling debt. I can pay the shards myself, and we all can..." However, Changing Star interrupted him. Her voice was simply inexplicable, calm, and even. "It's not about shards, it's about justice and law. After all, the law is our only guiding star in this dark world. Without its light, there's only darkness." Her words echoed in the Grand Hall and put a grim expression on Gemma's face. By repeating what Gunlaug had said here a few days prior, she left him with little choice but to satisfy the request for a challenge. After all, going against it would be tantamount to going against the Bright Lord's will. How devious! Did she learn that from me? The hunter looked away with regret, remained silent for some time, and then said to one of the guards in a dark tone, "Go and bring Andal here. Tell that bastard that after he kills this stupid girl, he and I will have a long conversation about his life choices." Then he glanced at Neff and said, "And you, say your goodbyes and prepare for battle. Oh, right. What is your name? Tell us. That way you will be at least remembered." Looking him right in the eyes, Neff stayed quiet for a bit and then answered. Her clear voice resounded loudly in the Grand Hall. "I am Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan." Suddenly, everything became silent. Chapter 154. Light of the Seven. Everyone grew quiet. Even Gemma seemed to be slightly stunned by that proclamation. The only person to not react to it at all was Castor, who had entered the Grand Hall a bit earlier and was now standing by one of the walls, watching Nephis with a complex expression. Her full name was shocking to hear for two entirely different but equally earth-shattering reasons. Firstly, she had not called herself by a human name, but by a true one. In the entire history of a human civilization, only a handful of Awakened had managed to earn a true name in their first nightmare. Needless to say, none of them was among the 1,000 sleepers currently trapped on the Forgotten Shore. Even Gunlaug himself did not have one. But Nephis did. And Sunny too, of course, but no one had to know that. Secondly, she had announced herself to be a legacy, and not just any legacy at that, but one from the legendary Immortal Flame Clan. A clan that had been responsible for propelling the entire human species forward not once, but twice. First by helping conquer the second nightmare, then the third. A combination of these facts was enough to set off a metamorphical explosion in the middle of the Dark City. If this was true, then she could be considered to be at least an almost messianic existence here on the Forgotten Shore. Suddenly the calmness with which she dared to challenge a fearsome pathfinder to a battle to the death did not seem that strange. The dazed looks in the eyes of all the sleepers gathered in the Grand Hall had slowly begun to give place to a subtle, tentative, weak glow. It was as though a tiny seed of hope was suddenly planted in the dead soil of their lightless, forlorn souls. Either by accident or on purpose, Nephis chose that exact moment to summon her armor. Numerous sparks of light surrounded her in a whirlpool of soft radiance, and when they were gone, a striking black and white armor had appeared on her graceful body. Everyone's eyes were immediately glued to the symbol on its breastplate. On it, 7 shining stars were intricately engraved into the strange white metal. That symbol! It's Starlight Crest! The crest of the 7. Just like Sunny, many of the inhabitants of the Bright Castle were familiar with the symbol of the 7 stars. Not only was it carved into the robe of the giant statue standing in front of the impregnable city wall, it was also often depicted in numerous stone carvings decorating the walls of the ancient fortress. It seemed to represent the 7 heroes that had once vowed to vanquish the darkness consuming this cursed land, and lead its people back into the light. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his spine. What? What is she doing? Is it all a coincidence, or did Nephis plan everything? Does she not understand how these fools will react to such theatrics? If they get the wrong idea and start running their mouths about how she is some sort of heavenly savior, Gunla will soon come knocking on our doors. What did Neff say? Just follow her lead and try to look virtuous? Sunny stared at her back, stumped. How would he even do that? There had never even been a single drop of virtue in his entire body. Meanwhile, Gemma had finally managed to compose himself and threw an evaluating look at Changing Star. If there had been nothing but neglect and disregard in his eyes before, there was now a hint of dark wariness in them. Slowly, the leader of the hunters smiled. Ah, in that case, nice to meet you. I must say, it's a very impressive name you have there. Makes one wonder where it came from. The implication behind these words was easy to understand. Gemma was insinuating that Nephis was lying. It seemed as though this insinuation had removed a veil from everyone's eyes. Most people quickly lost their wistful expressions, once again looking at her either somberly or with dark anticipation. Only now there were also hints of mocking disdain on some of their faces. And yet, several of them were still staring at her with expressions full of hesitant, timid faith. Changing Star did not react to any of that in any way. She simply remained calm and indifferent, as though she existed slightly apart from the dirt and despair of this world. Soon, Andal, the Pathfinder, was led into the Grand Hall. The Pathfinder was of average height and solid build, with menacing blue eyes and a sharp jaw. His head was shaved on the sides, with the remaining hair weaved into a short braid. He appeared to be slightly older than the rest of the sleepers gathered in the Grand Hall, with the exception of Gemma himself. Andal was probably around 24 years old. He looked like a skilled, seasoned, and ruthless fighter. Every Pathfinder was nothing less than elite among elites, and he was no exception. Even those who hated Andal stared at him with fear and respect, even veneration. Entering the hall, Andal threw a dark look at Nephis and walked forward to the base of the steps leading to the White Throne. There he stopped and bowed, showing his respect to the leader of hunters. "I'm here." Gemma stared at him with an irritated, contemptuous expression, and then sighed. "You know why I've summoned you here?" The Pathfinder smirked. "Some wench wants to challenge me? Good. I was very sad to let Horace have all the fun last time." Several angry whispers sounded from the crowd, but no one dared to reveal their hatred toward the arrogant murderer openly. The corner of Gemma's mouth turned downward. He remained silent for some time, and then said in a dangerous tone, "Fun? Did you say fun? Well, Andal, if you lacked excitement in your life, you should just have told me. How about this? After you kill that girl, I will show you what real fun is." With that, he gestured to the guards that the fight could begin. Andal frowned a little, but then turned around with a dark smile on his lips. Sonny and Cassie were led to the side, where they joined the crowd of spectating sleepers. By that point, there was a considerable amount of them gathered in the Grand Hall. Everyone looked at the fearsome Pathfinder and Nephis with a mix of tension and anticipation. Some were here just to see a macabre show, waiting with excitement for blood to flow. To them, it didn't matter who lived and who died, although none believed that the girl from the outer settlement had any chance of surviving in a duel against the experienced Pathfinder. Others wanted to see Andal punished for his crimes, but even these people seemed to believe that Neff was doomed to die. They just hoped that she would manage to make the bastard bleed a little before she did. Perhaps only Cassie, Sunny, and Castor knew that the result of this fight was not as predictable as everyone seemed to think. Not wasting any time, Andal summoned his weapon and walked toward Changing Star. In his hand, a vicious, truly forged falchion suddenly gleamed with polished luster, its edge turning sharper than that of a razor. With a shudder, Sunny realized that not even the Starlit Legion armor would stop such a blade. The Pathfinder's movements were soft and deceptive, betraying years of experience in bloody battles against both nightmare creatures and humans. That dark smile had never left his lips, and there was bloodlust burning in his eyes. After years spent hunting monsters, he looked like a monster himself. However, Nephis just stood there calmly and watched him approach, not even trying to summon her sword. What is she doing? Trying to mimic Horace? When the distance between them shortened to that of only several steps, everyone held their breaths. Suddenly, Andal flourished his cleaver and lunged forward with astonishing, almost inhuman speed. His push was so powerful that dust flew into the air from under the soles of his boots. Sunny clenched his fists. "What is she—" Just a fraction of a second before the magically enhanced blade cleaved her apart, Nephis suddenly sidestepped the strike and threw her arms into the air, simultaneously summoning her longsword. The ethereal sparks of light passed through the blade of Andal's falchion, forming into silvery steel only on the other side of it. The Pathfinder's eyes widened. Forever. Without anything separating it from the enemy's flesh, the longsword that had just formed from the thin air behind the falchion bit into his neck, cleanly severing Andal's head from his shoulders. As blood shot into the air from the Pathfinder's neck, his head rolled on the floor like a macabre ball and stopped near the steps that led to Gunlaug's white throne. It seemed as though all the oxygen was suddenly sucked out of the grand hall. In the deathly silence, Andal's body heavily fell on the white marble. Everyone was staring at Nephis in utter disbelief. The sleepers, the guards, even Gemma. Honestly, Sunny himself was a bit stunned. Of course, he had suspected that Changing Star might win the duel, but even he did not expect that she would kill an actual Pathfinder, one of the most fearsome warriors in the Bright Castle, with just one strike. Dismissing her sword with a cold expression on her face, Nephis walked over to the marble steps, picked up the severed head by the hair, and looked up at the leader of the hunters. Then, with a well-practiced, polite smile, she said, "Oh, it was nice to meet you too." Chapter 155. First Recruits. The blood was still dripping from Andal's severed head when they left the castle. Nephis was holding it by the hair. Her face was indifferent as always. It seemed as though carrying human heads was not even something worthy of changing facial expressions. Suddenly, Sunny saw Changing Star in a new light. It was a long time since he had been last wary of her, but now he was starting to wonder. Just how many people had she killed in the past? The facial expressions of everyone else, though, ranged from astonishment to horror. People who had witnessed the duel stared at Nephis as though she was some sort of avenging angel. The others treated her as a terrifying demon. I wonder how much soul essence she had absorbed with this one kill. It has to be a lot, right? But those were just the inhabitants of the castle. The reactions of the people of the outer settlement were strangely reserved, but even more intense. They had never seen one of them stroll to the ancient fortress and walk away freely with a severed head of a Pathfinder in their hands. Now, all of them were watching silently, an inexorable, dark, sweltering emotion burning in their eyes. All of it made Sunny very uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if Nephis knew what kind of storm her stunt had evoked in the hearts of these people. That sort of emotion was dangerous and almost impossible to control. If she didn't know, things could turn really bad really quickly. But it was even worse if she did, and had done it on purpose. Was Neph really capable of such ingenious and effective manipulation? Was this her plan all along? Sunny wasn't sure that he knew this side of Changing Star. Come to think of it, he didn't really know that much about her at all. Consumed by these doubts, Sunny didn't even notice that they were already in front of Effie's cabin. He glanced at the sky, only to see the sun hiding behind the ominous silhouette of the Crimson Spire. It was evening, just like Nephis had promised. Scary. The unruly huntress opened the door before they even knocked, a hint of irritation in her eyes. What's with all the commotion? Can't a girl spend a day in... Noticing the three of them, she froze. Without so much as batting an eye, Nephis simply threw Andal's head to Effie's feet and asked, "Can we talk now?" Looking down at the macabre present, the huntress narrowed her eyes. Her face darkened. A few moments later, she glanced up and said in a grim voice, "Come inside." As soon as the door closed behind them, Effie asked in a furious whisper, "What the hell have you done, princess?" Nephis tilted her head and slightly frowned. Then she said with a hint of sincere confusion in her voice, "You wanted me to prove my strength, did you not?" The huntress stared at her in disbelief. Misunderstanding her silence, Neph blinked, then added, "Oh, that head belonged to... I know whose head it is. Where did you get it?" Sunny sighed and slumped heavily on one of the sturdy chests. Then he forced out a dark smile and said, "Oh, by the way, you might be the last human in the Dark City to learn this, but standing right in front of you is none other than Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, the champion of justice. She just walked into the castle, challenged the bastard, and killed him with one strike of her sword, right under everyone's eyes. By now, this must be the only thing people are talking about." His tone lacked any kind of amusement. If anything, it seemed as though Sunny was just barely stopping himself from cursing out loud. Why did trouble have to follow him everywhere he went? While Neph and Cassie were anxiously waiting for Effie's response, Sunny just stared at his shadow, hoping to find some sympathy. Sadly, there wasn't any to be found. The shadow was just staring back at him, full of jubilant gloating. Effie, meanwhile, blinked a couple of times and looked at them with a strange expression. "That's right, one while you can." Then she threw her head back and laughed out loud. Oh gods, did you really? This is priceless. I wish I'd seen their faces. Sunny watched her with his mouth wide open. That was not the reaction he had been expecting. Crazy. They're all crazy. I'm surrounded by crazy people. When Effie finished laughing, she glanced at Changing Star with a dark but gleeful expression. All right, you've proven your point. But there's something you should know. Back when I refused to join the host, Gunlog made it clear that if he can't have me, no one else will. Ever since, any group that dared to invite me to join them ended up regretting their decision. By hiring me as a guide, you will be putting yourself in his crosshairs. Are you sure you want to do this? So, there was more to her story. No wonder she was so solitary. In the ensuing silence, Sunny was the first one to speak. His voice sounded bitter and dejected. I mean, it's a bit late to worry about that, don't you think? The next morning, they were preparing to go on a hunt. A small crowd of slum dwellers gathered around to see them off, their dark eyes burning with a strange mix of hope and anguish. By now, the story of Changing Star's clever ruse and heroic battle against villainous Pathfinder Andal had already flown all over the place, growing more and more unbelievable with each retelling. Now, these people came to witness her with their own eyes. They were especially interested in the Starlight Legion armor and the symbol engraved on its breastplate. Who knew that the memory of a simple carapace centurion would have such an effect on the inhabitants of the Dark City? Sunny was not happy about it at all. The previous evening, he had a chance to ask Nephis a few questions after they had returned to their lodge. However, he kept most of them to himself, not knowing how to properly express his feelings. In the end, he only asked about how she had managed to defeat her human opponent, who was much more powerful in terms of physical prowess so easily. Changing Star's answer was very simple. She just shrugged and said, an old legacy trick, which pretty much explained everything and nothing at all. And now they were going into the Dark City to hunt monsters. When the four of them were ready to set off, a sudden hum of voices made them turn around. The slum dweller stepped aside, letting a tall young man walk through. Sunny frowned. Great, what is he doing here? Walking closer, Castor stopped a few meters away from them and gave a polite bow. Lady Nephis, Huntress Athena, Cassia, Sunny, good morning to all of you. I, Castor of the Han Li clan, would like to join your hunting party. Will you have me? Everyone grew quiet for a few moments. Despite Sunny's dislike of the handsome legacy, having him on their side would be an incredible boon. Genius fighters like Castor were hard to come by anywhere, let alone on the Forgotten Shore. He felt torn. A buzz of whispers rose from the crowd. People were shocked to see a warrior from the castle volunteering to join an outer settlement cohort, and one of such fearsome reputation, too. After some time had passed, Changing Star simply shrugged. If you want. Just like that, the proud scion of the Han Li clan had become the 5th member of their hunting party. It was strange to see their numbers grow after months spent alone in the labyrinth, but that was probably inevitable. What else did Sunny expect? That it would just be the 3 of them forever? Stupid. Together, the 5 sleepers left the slum of the outer settlement behind and stepped on the road of white stone that led to the cursed ruins. And just like that, the fates of every human in the Dark City were sealed. The end had begun. Chapter 156. Free Lunch. Their first hunt was surprisingly uneventful. Guided by an experienced pathfinder and augmented by Sunny's stealthy shadow, they managed to avoid any fallen creatures and arrived at the destination in one piece. There, the group hid in the ruins and waited for their prey to show up. The plan of battle was discussed beforehand. After Effie had described the type of monster they were here to kill, complete with a detailed list of its strengths and weaknesses, Nephis quickly assigned different roles to different people. Sunny had expected that things would work just like back in the labyrinth, but to his surprise, they did not. Just like before, Neph was going to take most of the risk and lure the enemy into revealing its vulnerability. However, Castor was going to be the one to make use of it and deal the final blow, not Sunny. Which made sense, really. After all, his ability was not a combat one, at least not officially. It was rational to entrust the role to someone with an incredibly powerful combat ability, as the one Castor possessed. Still, for some reason, Sunny felt angry about it. It felt as though he was being replaced. Not wishing to appear childish, he swallowed his bitterness and remained silent. When the monster did show up, everything went perfectly. Nephis and Castor were able to finish the creature off without sustaining any injuries. Their teamwork, while not effortless, was strangely harmonious, probably because they were both legacies and had received similar kind of training. Sunny, whose task was to join the fray if things went wrong, ended up not having to lift a finger. Neither did Effie, who simply stayed with Cassie in case the blind girl needed protection. After everything was over, she left. Ha! This is the easiest meal I've ever earned. Effie's status in the party was a bit strange. Unlike the rest of them, she had not shown any desire to join the cohort officially. Instead, she was somewhat of a hired worker. Her responsibilities included guiding the party through the ruins and providing them with information, and nothing else. She wasn't even required to fight side by side with them. After the nightmare creature was dead, they quickly butchered it and left the scene of the battle loaded with a heavy weight of meat. Before the shadow of the Crimson Spire fell on the Dark City, the cohort was already approaching the marble arch at the base of the hill. This was when something unexpected happened, and it happened because of Nephis. After giving a fair share of the spoils to the vigorous huntress, she glanced at Sunny, Cassie, and Castor. Then, Changing Star said, "I would like for you three to entrust me with your part of the meat." What? What is that about? Before Sunny had an opportunity to ask a question, Cassie already smiled and said, "Of course, Neph." Castor did not linger either. With a small bow, he nodded, "As you wish, Lady Nephis." Sunny gritted his teeth. After that, he would have looked like a complete jerk if he were to start interrogating her, especially because technically he had not done anything except for lending his shadow to Effie. Nephis and Castor were the ones who had actually risked their lives. Fine. Nephis gave them a nod and continued walking up the white road. When they returned to the outer settlement, she separated the remaining share of monster meat into two parts. One, much smaller part, she handed to Cassie. The other, incomparably larger part, she simply placed on the white stones in front of their lodge. Effie looked at the whole process with curiosity. So did the slum dwellers who had gathered to welcome them back. Sunny frowned. "What are you doing?" Changing Star glanced at him and then gestured to the small bundle of meat in Cassie's hands. "This is for us to sustain ourselves. We will eat that meat until our next hunt." Somebody from the crowd shouted, "What about the rest? Are you selling it? What is your price?" It was customary for the outer settlement hunters to sell some of their spoils. That was how people here fed themselves. The meat could be exchanged for items, services, or, in very rare cases, actual shards. Neff turned to the people who had gathered around and looked at them all with a frown. When everyone grew quiet, she said in a cold tone, "My hunting party will not be selling any meat. Ever." Before anyone had time to react, dismayed by that answer, she took a step to the side, gestured to the large pile of meat, and said, "Instead, we will be giving it away for free." A dead silence hung above the edge of the outer settlement. The slum dwellers who had come to catch a glimpse of Changing Star, or in hope of procuring some food, were all looking at Nephis with a dark mix of mistrust, disbelief, and suspicion. After a while, someone shouted, "What trick are you trying to play? People here are hungry, Changing Star. Shame on you." Nephis crossed her arms, furrowed with a brow, and answered, "There is no trick. Everyone is free to take a small share of the meat to fill their stomach." The young man who had accused her before laughed. "Why would you hand it out for free? Do you think they were fools?" Sunny was being tormented by the same question. He often joked about Neff's foolish nobility, but he also knew that she wasn't really stupid. She always had a reason for everything she did, even if those reasons sometimes seemed insane to him. Lately, he even started to suspect that Neff was much more cynical and pragmatic than he had ever given her credit for. It's just that her version of cynicism was very different from his own. What was she doing? Meanwhile, Nephis pierced the shouter with a cold look, scowled, and said, a hint of anger in her voice, "Why? Am I not a human? Are you not humans? Does a human need a reason to help others of her kind in this cursed place?" She took a step forward and looked at the gathered people, making them shiver under her heavy gaze. "Shame on me. No, shame on you all for forgetting who you are. We are people, not beasts. In the real world or here in the dream realm, this is who we are." Her words echoed above the white stones, mixing with the howling wind. "Now, come forward and take some food if you're hungry." The slum dwellers were still not convinced. However, their hunger was stronger than their wariness. Soon the first of them stepped forward, tentatively took a small strip of meat, threw a furtive glance at Nephis, and then hurriedly walked away. When the others saw that nothing happened to him, they became braver. Young men and women dressed in rags formed a messy line. One by one, they came forward, received their tiny piece of meat, and then disappeared with haste, afraid that it will be taken back. Slowly, a new kind of light appeared in their faces. It was the same timid, weak emotion that Sunny had noticed in the eyes of the castle inhabitants after Neff had announced her name. It was something that precipitated hope, or maybe faith. With a dark expression on his face, Sunny looked up at the tiny silhouettes of guards observing them from the walls of the magnificent fortress. Nephis was right when she said that they were all still people. However, she was wrong about everything else, because people were much worse than beasts. He did not like what was happening at all. Chapter 157 Wind of Change. After that day, things moved with a speed that left Sunny disoriented. It was as though he was being pulled forward by an overpowering current, helpless to slow down or change direction. Before he could react to one change, another would happen, making him feel like he was losing control. Everything was happening so fast that he found it difficult to adjust. It was hard not to fear that, eventually, he would simply be left behind. After that first hunt where Nephis had chosen to give most of the spoils away, she led them on several more. Not all of those hunts went as smoothly, but they did manage to return victorious, if a little battered. Every time, she paid Effie her share of the meat, took a small amount for them to consume, and gave the rest to the people of the outer settlement free of charge. Because of how little their own share was, the group was forced to hunt every other day instead of once or twice a month. Sunny did not understand at all why they were taking on all that unnecessary risk. Provided he wasn't exposed to many risks himself. Apart from a couple of short battles where Neff and Castor ended up requiring some backup, he spent most of his time with Effie, serving as her scout and slowly learning the ins and outs of the Dark City from her. With the well of knowledge that the unruly huntress possessed and his nimble shadow, the party rarely met anything that they weren't ready to face. This gave them an incredible advantage over all other hunting parties of the outer settlement, and even some of Gunlaug's own. Soon, their flawless and intense track record earned the cohort reputation and renown. They weren't seen as newcomers anymore. Instead, people considered them to be nothing short of the strongest hunters in the slum. Many even believed that Changing Star and her people were in no way inferior to the hunters of the Bright Castle. Nephis herself was known to be a fearsome fighter ever since her dramatic duel with Andal. Effie had the reputation as one of the outer settlement's best from a long time ago. Handsome and capable Castor quickly won respect and adoration thanks to his amiable personality, noble bearing, and skill. The three of them were considered to be the core of the party, with Cassie and Sunny existing somewhere on the periphery. People loved Cassie because Neff had entrusted her with the responsibility of handing out the free meat, and also because it was nearly impossible not to love this sweet, exquisitely beautiful, and tragic girl. For most of the slum dwellers, she was the welcoming face of the cohort. Sunny, on the other hand, no one really paid him any attention. With no valiant feats of vanquishing monsters of the Dark City under his belt, most considered him to be a mere support member of the party, inconsequential at best, a charity case at worst, if they even remembered his existence. Sunny was simultaneously happy to live in obscurity and secretly infuriated by this lack of recognition. It was good that no one suspected how powerful he really was, and yet, watching everyone fall over themselves in Castor's presence while completely ignoring his own made Sunny want to kill something, or someone. Especially because, due to the tactical composition of the cohort, Nephis spent most of her time with the handsome legacy. They seemed to work especially well together. When this frustration threatened to overwhelm Sunny, he would go away, find a quiet corner, and train his katas until every muscle in his body hurt. Usually, the whistle of the Midnight Shard's blade cutting air was enough to calm him down. He trained swordsmanship every day after day, finding strange comfort in it. At least this was something he could control. Of course, Sunny was never entirely relaxed. In fact, with each day he grew more and more anxious, because other things were changing as well. After each hunt, Changing Star would provide the dwellers of the slum with free food. At first they treated her with distrust, then with gratitude, and finally with something akin to reverence. The strange light that Sunny had noticed in their eyes after that first time was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Some people even started jokingly call her Saint Nephis, as though she was some sort of angel. However, he felt that these words strangely contained less and less humor with each day. It was really very creepy, not to mention dangerous. The more people looked at Neff like she was their personal savior, the more he feared how drastic Gunlaug's reaction would be. If history had shown anything, it was that kings never went easy on meddling messiahs. And throughout all of that, the same question continued to torment Sunny. Was all of this an accident, or had Nephis done it on purpose? As time went by, more and more random people joined their group. They weren't hunters, just forlorn young men and women from the outer settlement who wanted to help. They tended to monster hides the cohort brought back from the hunts, maintained various tools and gear that needed to be used, assisted Cassie with handing out food, and did other kinds of small but useful things. Soon the ramshackle lodge was full of them. Sunny didn't even know all of their names. It seemed as though every day someone new would appear, acting as they had always been a part of the group. What's worse, not all of them seemed to know who he was either. Not once and not twice someone would smile at him and ask in a friendly tone, "Are you new?" Of course, bastards never said the same thing to Castor. Sunny felt he was slowly becoming a stranger in his own home. The feeling was rather unpleasant, not to mention how perfectly it fit all his insecurities. What's worse, these new people really made him uncomfortable. He wasn't really sure whether they were Changing Star's helpers or if they were her followers. Were they loyal or devout? One night, after a couple of weeks of this, he was suddenly awoken by Cassie tugging on his sleeve. The blind girl was whispering, "Sunny, wake up!" A moment later, he was already on his feet, ready to summon the Midnight Shard. A light coming from the other room told him that Neff was awake too. "Gunlaug, did someone betray us?" "What's wrong?" Cassie covered the candle she was holding in her hand and answered in a worried voice. Something is coming from the road. I've dreamt of it. A nightmare creature." Knowing what had to be done, Sunny simply nodded, gripped her shoulder for reassurance, and walked over to meet Nephis. Since their lodge was on the edge of the slum, right in front of the entrance of the ancient road, they had no choice but to fight. That night, the three of them, Changing Star, Sunny, and Castor, battled a devil that had wandered up to the hill and fought it off before it could reach the outer settlement. When dawn came, terrified people walked out of their hovels on shaking legs and saw the horrible marks left on the white stones by the beast's claws, as well as puddles of blood, both human and that of a monster, steaming in the morning cold. They also saw Changing Star leaning tiredly on her silver sword. Sunny, who was sitting with his back against the wall of the lodge and breathing heavily, was looking at her too. Back when he was describing to Nephis why Gunlaug could never be defeated, he had told her that every facet of life here was under his control. Food, safety, hope, fear, even power itself. Now, Changing Star had given these people food. By protecting the outer settlement, she had given them safety. She had even given them hope. There was also the fear that the inhabitants of the castle felt after Neff had easily beheaded one of their pathfinders. All that remained was power. Finally, the question that pressed heavily on his mind had an answer. No, none of this was coincidence. Everything that happened, from choosing the outermost building in the slum as their base to insisting on giving away the food for free, was part of Changing Star's strange but methodical plan. She knew what she was doing all along. But why was she doing this? What was her ultimate goal? Uneasy, Sunny stared at Nephis and wondered about the future. Chapter 158 Invisible. After about a month of living in the outer settlement, Sunny woke up one morning with the feeling of not belonging anywhere in this world. This familiar feeling had pursued him for most of his life, and had returned recently after being gone for some time. With a sigh, he rose from his narrow cot and summoned the puppeteer Shroud. The stone lodge was already full of sounds and voices. The tempting smell of breakfast filled the air. Coming out of his small room, Sunny saw a bunch of Neff's helpers rushing here and there, busy with various tasks. Some of them stopped to greet him, others did not. He paid no attention to them and went outside to wash his face and take a look at the sky. The gray sky of the Forgotten Shore looked as it always did. Nothing ever really changed in this loathsome hell. On his way back, Sunny noticed a gaunt figure standing hesitantly near the doors of the lodge. The ragged young man looked very familiar. Reaching into his memory, Sunny identified him as the friendly but nervous receptionist from the castle. His clothes were much less clean and tidy than they had been before, and his face had become even thinner. The young man had clearly seen better days. What is he doing here? Coming closer, Sunny called out to the young man, Harper, right? How come you're here?" Harper flinched, then looked at him with anxious eyes. Oh, Sunless, it's so nice to see you. Sunny stared at him for a while, then asked bluntly, Did they kick you out of the castle? Harper's face instantly fell. Lowering his gaze, he stayed silent for a few moments and then said quietly, Um, well, I haven't been able to pay the tribute anymore, so yes, I guess they did. Then he glanced up, hesitated, and asked in a weak voice, I I heard that I can get some food here? Sunny tried to give him a reassuring smile. Sure. Usually we give out meat after the hunts, but if you're hungry right now, I'm certain there's something we can do. Just talk to, a girl with red hair. She's in charge of breakfast, I think. Harper smiled, too, the weak light of hope igniting in his eyes. Really? They will just give me a meal for free? Sunny shrugged. Why not? We have enough food right now. Most of those guys and girls are always here anyway. They're like guests that won't leave. It doesn't matter. They help around, doing this and that, to express their gratitude, I guess. If you feel guilty just eating here for free, ask them for some chore. This might not be the bright castle, but you'll see that life here cannot be bad as well. Guiding the gaunt young man inside, Sunny directed him toward the kitchen inside. Even castle dwellers were now coming to their lodge. If this went on, he would have to share his room with some random stranger. What a joke. Entering the main hall, he noticed Nephis and Castor standing near the window, discussing the approaching hunt. This morning, there were several hunters from the other party surrounding them. The cohort had been planning a big joint hunt for a while now, and today was the day. Did they just start without me? Hiding his discomfort, Sunny walked over to the group of hunters and greeted them. Castor smiled at him, while Nephis simply nodded. The other hunters glanced at the new arrival and didn't pay him much attention. Fools, if you knew who stands before you. Consoling himself with these childish thoughts, Sunny listened to the discussion. One of the hunters was speaking. South of the collapsed lighthouse is a good choice, but the awakened creatures living there have an incredibly sharp hearing. Attacking them in large numbers won't be easy. In the past month, their lodge had gone through a transformation. The remnants of broken furniture were long gone and replaced. Some of the new pieces of furniture came from the ruins. Some were made right here by the craftsmen of the outer settlement. There were monster hides and decorations hung on the walls, making the space look neat and presentable. These days, the lodge appeared as the headquarters of a small but prosperous awakened cohort. There was even a large map of the Dark City on one of the walls, with various symbols marking all kinds of useful information. Currently, the hunter was pointing at a particular spot on the map. This spot right here is much more promising. Blood fiends are known to dwell in these parts. They hibernate during the day, so if you manage to find a lair or two... Castor shook his head. The area you're suggesting is too close to the territory of those strange living statues. We all know how formidable those bizarre creatures are. I still think that south of the lighthouse is better. We just need to think of a way to deceive the hearing of the monsters. Suddenly finding something that he could be helpful with, Sunny said, I have a bell that can... However, his voice drowned in the buzz of the conversation. No one paid attention to his words. Embarrassed, Sunny inhaled deeply, waited for a few seconds, and spoke again. Actually, we can use one of my 2 sound-producing memories to... But right at that moment, Castor seemed to come up with a brilliant idea. Everyone listened to him, turning their backs to Sunny. It was as though he was completely invisible. What? What's even the damn point? Sunny stood there for a minute or two, feeling awkward, angry, and utterly stupid. Then he simply turned around and walked away. Finding his way to the roof of the lodge, he climbed on top of the second-story addition and sat there, solemnly watching as the sun slowly climbed up. After a while, Sunny sighed and closed his eyes, letting the shadow slip back into the building. Just as he had expected, no one even noticed his absence. Not surprised, he sent the shadow around the lodge, watching all the people who were busy making Neff's mysterious plans happen. Everyone seemed full of energy, enthusiasm, and a sense of belonging. Why was he the only one who couldn't fit in? Even that guy from the castle, Harper, had already found some friends. He was currently helping the red-haired girl who was in charge of breakfast wash the dishes. Sunny frowned. Something wasn't quite right with Harper. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the gaunt young man seemed a little off somehow. Forgetting all about his bad mood, Sunny concentrated on watching the timid sleeper. Harper seemed to do just what any newcomer would do, helping people, learning their names, and asking questions about how things worked in Changing Stars Party. It seemed as though he wanted very badly to stay in the lodge and become useful, which was understandable. But something was wrong. Sunny's suspicions were confirmed when, about an hour later, Harper left the lodge and went back into the slum. With the shadows stealthily following him from behind, the gaunt young man made sure that no one saw him and hurriedly dove into a secluded alley. Deep in the darkness of that alley, a man was waiting for him. Sunny frowned, recognizing one of the high-ranking guards from the castle. So that's what all this is about. The guard, meanwhile, glared at Harper and asked in a rough, unfriendly tone, "Well?" Harper looked down, his fear and anxiousness apparent. Yes, sir, I've done what you told me. It wasn't very hard." The guard smiled. "Good. It seems that you really do want to return to the castle." Harper glanced up, a desperate light igniting in his eyes. "So, really? I can return? Even though I don't have any shards to pay the tribute?" The smile disappeared from the guard's face. "You will be able to return after you gather all the information that I told you to learn. If you do, I'll invite you inside myself. No need to even worry about the tribute. But, remember, I need to know everything about the core members of the cohort, including Saint Nephis herself. Their aspects, their abilities, their flaws. I even want to know what hand they used to wipe, understand?" Harper paled. "But, sir, things like that, it won't be easy to learn them, especially for a simple servant like me." The guard frowned. "Didn't you say that you knew 2 of the cohort members already? This is why I give you the chance to begin with. Did you lie to me, boy?" The gaunt young man flinched. No, I do know them. I actually spoke with Lady Changing Star's scout already. He's a friend of mine." A wide, menacing smile appeared on the guard's face. "Well, what's the problem? Just get the fool talking. Rats like him will tell you everything as long as you pay them a little attention, believe me. I'm willing to bet that this useless freeloader is walking around full of jealousy and delusions of grandeur. Pretend to respect him even a little and he won't be able to shut up." Ouch. Harper nodded, then suddenly hesitated. After a few moments of silence, he asked in a timid voice, "Sir, you won't hurt them, will you? They're good people." The guard stared at him for a second or two, then said in a dark, mocking tone, "Why do you ask if you already know the answer?" Hearing those words, Harper deflated. His face darkened, and he lowered his head, as though ashamed to look straight. However, he didn't object. That bastard. Just wait and see. Sunny was already planning the beating he was going to give the cowardly young man before throwing him out of the lodge, but at that moment a voice called out for him. It was Effie. "Hey, doofus, are you already asleep? Come down, the hunt is starting." Torn away from the shadow's perspective, Sunny threw a dark glance at the tall huntress, called his shadow back and sighed. "I'll deal with him after we return." But by the time he returned, Sunny was in no state to deal with anything. Chapter 159 Revelation. Despite all his misgivings and unease, Sunny had never expected that this hunt was going to change everything. He was just going through the motions, somewhat on edge because of the scale of this joint operation, but also strangely reassured by the large number of hunters surrounding him. The unusual hunting party left the outer settlement at noon, heading east to the massive ruin of a collapsed lighthouse that was situated at the edge of the city. There were almost 20 of them gathered together, all carefully making their way through the deadly maze of narrow streets, with Effie serving as the chief pathfinder and Sunny helping her by scouting ahead. The plan was as straightforward and simple as possible. However, nothing was really ever safe in the Dark City. Everyone was prepared for the worst. And pretty soon, their fears came true. Halfway to their destination, a sudden sound made Effie freeze in place. Raising a fist to signal everyone to stop, she peered into the fog, a dark and foreboding expression on her face. Feeling that something bad was about to happen, Sunny commanded his shadow to return and moved closer to Cassie. His hand was ready to grasp the hilt of the midnight shard out of the air. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Then Effie's pupil suddenly widened. "Scatter!" As soon as the word left her mouth, the experienced hunters dashed in different directions. Sunny himself grabbed Cassie and lunged to the side, dragging her along with him. Then, something large and heavy crashed from above into the cobblestones where the sleepers had been standing just a second ago. Luckily, most of them were already somewhere else due to Effie's timely warning. However, a couple of people were a little late to react, their screams drowned in the sickening sound of tearing flesh. Sonny cursed. His shadow was nowhere near yet, leaving him with no choice but to fight without its aid. He spun around, summoning the Midnight Shard, and froze for a fraction of a second, all blood draining from his face. Out there, in the middle of the street, a massive, winged creature was standing on the cracked cobblestones, its pale body and black feathers stained by the blood of the unfortunate hunters. Its terrifying beak was open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like fangs. A spire messenger. As Sonny watched, momentarily paralyzed by fear, a long red tongue snaked out of the creature's maw to lick the blood off its face. Move! Shaking off the paralysis, Sonny gripped his sword and prepared to fight for his life. His and Cassie's. After that, everything happened incredibly fast, but also felt like an eternity. The hunters had a simple choice to make. Either separate into smaller groups and retreat into the ruins, risking encountering something equally or even more terrifying, or stand their ground and try to drive the fallen beast away. Without having to discuss it, everyone chose the second option. No matter how dangerous, a familiar enemy was always better than the unknown. Unknown. The surviving hunters attacked the abomination with all they had. Even though their memories had no chance of breaking through the skin of the terrible creature, each strike still hurt it. Those who had aspect abilities capable of dealing direct damage immediately used them, hoping to at least disorient the beast. Of course, no ability of a sleeper could ever hope to wound a fallen beast. However, if their assault was ferocious enough, the messenger could retreat to search for easier prey. If it only made the abomination angrier, however, most of them were going to die. More than anything, trying to resist creatures of this rank was nothing but a gamble. For several seconds, it wasn't clear which way the situation would turn. The messenger easily shrugged off the rain of attacks and lashed out with its beak, piercing one of the hunters clean through despite the man's mighty build and heavy armor. Another was almost torn apart by terrifying talons, but at the last second, Castor managed to pull the young man away thanks to his incredible speed. Sonny waited at the back, covering Cassie and praying that his shadow would come back in time to give him a chance of dealing damage to the damned creature. But in the end, it was Effie who dealt the decisive blow. Summoning her weapon, she leaped forward. Sonny could see her lean, powerful muscles moving like a wire rope under her olive skin. As though turning into a spring, her whole body tensed and then exploded with momentum. There was enough force behind her attack to split a mountain apart. Miraculously, the tip of her weapon managed to break the pale hide on the messenger's chest and stab deep, causing a stream of blood to shoot out. The creature screamed and then lashed out with its powerful paws at the hunters. A large round shield appeared on Effie's left hand. Digging the soles of her sandals into the ground, she leaned forward and received the terrifying blow. The cobblestones under her feet cracked, but the huntress remained standing. Spitting a mouthful of blood, she grinned crazily and twisted her weapon, causing more damage and pain to the messenger. It seemed as if the fallen beast did not expect to meet such fierce resistance from a bunch of ants, not to mention actually being hurt by them. Letting out another scream, it waved its wings to send the sleepers flying back, picked up the dead hunters, and jumped into the air. Soon the abomination turned into a dark spot in the skies. All that remained behind were puddles of blood, broken stones, and the moans of battered humans. Somehow, they had survived. Well, most of them. Effie straightened, dismissed her shield, and glanced down. Damn, I think my arm is broken. With blood running down her chin, the huntress laughed and leaned on her weapon, visibly exhausted. Sonny wanted to congratulate her on that awesome strike, but then something registered in his mind. Suddenly cold, he stared at Effie's weapon. He had never seen her fight before, so this was the first time Sonny saw what memory the huntress used in battle. It was a spear. An ancient, beautiful spear forged from bronze. Something clicked in his mind, disparate pieces of information connecting together. And then everything exploded. Or at least it felt that way, because Sunny finally understood the future. Chapter 160. The Future. Hey, doofus, you ready? Sunny reacted after a second or two, raising his head and staring at Effie with empty eyes. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about stuff. Effie gave him a strange look, then shrugged and turned away. Everyone was too busy to pay him any attention. Not that anyone ever did. Left alone, Sunny staggered and slowly lowered himself to the ground. In his mind, one phrase was repeating itself over and over, growing louder and louder with each second. A woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters. A woman with a bronze spear. This was a part of the vision that Cassie had seen back at the beginning of their journey, on the night they had spent atop the giant statue of a headless knight. The one that was so harrowing that she had almost jumped into the dark waters of the cursed sea just to run away from her terror. It was also the key that connected every little piece of information that Sunny knew into one cohesive picture and let him understand the true meaning of that terrifying vision. He shuddered, remembering what Cassie had told him on that dark night in stark detail. I saw the human castle again, only this time it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows. All the time, Sunny was sure, for some reason, that Cassie saw the cataclysm that had devoured this land and turned it into a desolate hell, creating the Forgotten Shore. The first part of the vision was clearly referring to how the curse of the all-consuming darkness had broken free from its 7 seals, so he had just assumed that the other parts of the vision spoke about the past too. But Effie's spear gave him an epiphany, a terrible revelation that he had been wrong all this time, that the apocalyptic images Cassie had described were not of the past but of the future. Their future. Trembling, Sunny raised his head and glanced at Nephis, who was using her powers to heal the wounded hunters, her ivory face contorted in a painful grimace. His eyes were wide and full of disbelief. It was all so clear. She was the lonely star that burned in the dark skies above the bright castle, bringing with it fire and rivers of blood. After all, her name was Changing Star. Or, depending on the runes that used to write it, Star of Misfortune. The Star of Ruin. Sunny spent so much time fearing what Gunlaug was going to do with Nephis, but he should have been scared of what she was going to do to him instead. A corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne? Why hadn't he realized the truth after seeing the Bright Lord for the first time? It was him. Gunlaug was the corpse in Cassie's vision. Effie was the woman drowning in the sea of monsters. The archer... Sunny didn't know yet, but he was sure that they would meet soon. Maybe only to die together. He had always known that Nephis was guided by some mysterious, overwhelming goal. He didn't know what that goal was, but it was certainly not here, on the Forgotten Shore. To achieve it, Changing Star had to find a way to return to the real world. That's why she had always been so unwavering and relentless in her ambition to move forward, overcome any obstacle, endure any pain. At times, it even seemed as though her conviction was more akin to an obsession. Nephis was willing to do anything to fulfill her dream. The comforting words she had told him on their first day in the Dark City suddenly resounded in his mind. Only now there was another, colder and much darker meaning hidden beneath their surface. We will find a way to return. No matter what has to be done, we will. No matter what has to be done. There was only one way to leave the Forgotten Shore, and it lay in the Crimson Spire. No sleeper could ever hope to reach that gateway in one piece. They would need an army to even try. Maybe then, walking on corpses, 1 or 2 survivors would be able to escape from this cursed place. But Nephis didn't have an army. Yet. To gather one, she would need to kill Gunlaug, usurp his power, and eliminate all opposition, drowning the Bright Castle in blood. Only then would she be able to rally every single sleeper left in the Dark City and lure them into following her on a suicidal crusade, knowing all too well that most of them would die because of it. No sane person would follow her. They won't, right? Sunny remembered the faces of the young men and women that had become part of their group in the last few weeks. The strange light of hope, or maybe faith, burning in their eyes. The almost religious reverence they felt toward Nephis. No, not Nephis. Toward Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan. Their personal angel. Were they sane still? Finally, he understood every part of Neff's plan. Looking at the beautiful young woman with silver hair, Sunny shivered. And then, there was the last part of the prophecy. On their way back, Sunny felt as though he was in a feverish dream. The magnitude of the revelation was too much for him. His mind felt weak, unsteady, and on the verge of breaking apart. He had never experienced such a deep feeling of shock. It was as though the very core of his being was violently shaken. He wasn't equipped with the right tools to cope with it. It felt as if he was on the verge of losing it. Sunny was truly horrified. Don't waste time trying to deal with your emotions. This is not the right time for your feelings. You need to figure out how all this affects you personally, and what you need to do to turn things to your advantage. After all, what was there to be scared of? That many people would die? What did their lives and deaths have to do with him? Yes, as long as he was the one left standing in the end, this whole thing might actually turn out to be beneficial. Hadn't he spent the last weeks being afraid of what Gunlaug was going to do with them? Well, now he knew that Gunlaug was going to end up as a corpse. Problem solved. Wasn't he crushed by the news that he would spend the rest of his life in this odious hell? Well, now that wasn't a certainty anymore. That last part of the prophecy. Everything was well. Better than ever. And yet, no matter how much Sunny was trying to be rational, he just couldn't help but be filled with terror. In the crimson light of sunset, he found a reason to leave the lodge and walk to the edge of the stone platform. No one really cared that much about his whereabouts, so it wasn't hard to disappear for a while. No one noticed that something was bothering Sunny either. They were all accustomed to his moody behavior anyway. Only Cassie seemed to have picked up on something. And Castor, who pretended to be carefree, but actually had a habit of watching anyone close to Nephis like a hawk. The bastard. Reaching the very end of the stone platform, Sunny turned around and looked at the outer settlement and the magnificent castle towering above it, with hundreds of sleepers rushing to find shelter before the coming of night. A cold and harrowing feeling gripped his heart. All these people are going to die. Neph was going to kill them. Was he willing to help her do it? For some reason, Sunny wanted to laugh. This whole situation was so sick and appalling that it was almost ridiculous. He was never an altruistic type, really. More than that, he always prided himself on being a cynical, selfish, and vicious person, but this was too much even for him. Grabbing his head, Sunny moaned, "What am I going to do?" At that moment, the sound of steps suddenly attracted his vision. A gaunt figure appeared from the slum and walked toward him. Sunny frowned. Oh, right. That guy. I've completely forgotten about him. Harper stopped a few paces away and smiled timidly. Sunless, can we talk? Chapter 161 Rubicon. Harper stared at him with that pathetic, timid smile frozen on his lips. In his eyes there was fake friendliness, worry, and desperation. For some reason, Sonny felt a violent urge to erase the smile off his face. You scum. In his rattled state, he was having trouble controlling his emotions. Something must have shown on his face because Harper suddenly blinked and took a step back. But in the end, the desire to be allowed back into the bright castle won over his caution. He forced himself to stay still, hesitated for a few moments, and said, I wanted to thank you for inviting me into your home this morning. Sonny looked at the gaunt young man. In the twilight of dusk, his pale face was hidden in deep shadows. Finally, he answered, Yeah, we can talk. Think, Sonny, think. But his mind was refusing to obey. Most of it was drowning in the sea of cold terror that had been summoned by the revelation of the future. What little remained was utterly disoriented. Sonny raised one hand and rubbed his face. He's a spy. He's here to make it easier for Gunlout to kill us. What should be done? In the morning, yes, back before everything changed, Sonny had seen Harper reporting to one of the guards. He wanted to give the cowardly young man a beating and throw him out of the lodge, but that would be a wrong decision. The best thing to do was not to expose the unfortunate spy, but to feign ignorance and feed him false information. Yes, that was the optimal way to deal with moles. As an aspiring spy himself, Sonny knew these things well. But would he be able to deceive Harper? By accident, the failed informant had chosen a perfect person as his mark. Sonny knew a lot of secrets and was incapable of lying. But he was also a master of deception, so... Sunless? Sonny flinched and glanced at the gaunt young man. Sorry, I'm a bit out of sorts after today's hunt. You wanted to talk? Reassured, Harper smiled again. You see, I wanted to thank you for everything you had done for me, and for all the people here in the settlement. When I left the castle, I brought a very special item with me. I thought of sharing it with you. Sonny frowned. A special item? I should see what his plan is exactly. Feed him a couple of little truths along with the lies, and then report to Neff in the morning. Right? Harper, meanwhile, was nodding energetically. It's, a bottle of liquor. Every month, a few are sold by the artisans working in the garden. Getting one is very hard, but I was lucky. Would you like to come and try? My hut is nearby. Sonny got distracted for a few moments, but then forced his mind to concentrate. What was Harper talking about? Artisans? Liquor? Luck? Why not? Giving Harper a nod, he gestured for the young man to lead the way and followed. As they passed other slum dwellers on their way to Harper's hovel, Sonny couldn't help but feel like they were surrounded by walking corpses. Most of these people were already dead, and they just didn't know it yet. But he did. The weight of this knowledge was slowly crushing him. Harper's small hut was even more pathetic than the other hovels in the slum. It was crudely constructed out of rotting pieces of wood, with plenty of cracks to let the cold wind in. Inside there was nothing except a pile of seaweed thatch that served as a flimsy mattress and a low wooden table. Sonny could understand why the gaunt sleeper was so desperate to return to the castle. At least there was a door. Once inside, Harper looked around with embarrassment and invited Sonny to sit on the floor in front of the table. Then he dug a glass jar from beneath the seaweed and placed it in front of him like a rare treasure. Producing a crude iron knife from somewhere, Harper then opened the wax seal of the jar, placed the knife on the table, and poured a milky white liquid into a chipped clay cup. Here! He handed the cup to Sonny and smiled. Sonny received it and smelled the strange liquor. He remembered many people in the outskirts who had drowned themselves in the bottle or killed themselves with cheap stimulants and drugs. Luckily, he was always too paranoid to allow anything to alter his mental state. Plus, for a long time, he couldn't allow himself to die before accomplishing a certain thing. That's why Sonny was not too familiar with alcohol. Bringing the cup to his lips, he held his breath and downed it in one go. A pleasant warmth immediately spread through his body, bringing it a bit of sweet solace. I can see the appeal. It wasn't too bad, really. Harper hurriedly refilled the cup and asked, I heard about the latest hunt. By God, you've survived an encounter with a spire messenger. That must have been horrible. Sonny lingered for a bit, then shrugged. I just stood at the back. The gaunt young man shook his head. Still, you are incredible. I hear that you've been with Lady Changing Star from the very beginning, surviving more than 2 months in the labyrinth. Is this true? He was a really bad actor. Even if Sonny didn't know that Harper was a spy already, he would have sensed something strange at this point. But it was easy to pretend not to notice anything. Rats like me will tell you everything as long as you show them a tiny bit of respect, huh? Flushed because of the liquor, Sonny slowly smiled. Oh, yes. In fact, if it wasn't for me, she would have been long dead. Do you know how many times I've saved her life? This part was entirely planned, aimed to create a false sense that Harper's plan to use pettiness and jealousy to loosen his tongue worked. However, the next words came out of Sonny's mouth on their own. Gritting his teeth, he suddenly paled and whispered, And for what, huh? For this? This wasn't supposed to happen. How did this happen? Then Sonny grabbed his head and forced out a dark laugh. And this is bad. What am I even saying? Mistaking his terror for the sign of the liquor doing its job, Harper got a little braver. You must have fought side by side with Lady Nephis a lot. Sonny lowered his head, then shrugged. Yeah. The gaunt young man hesitated for a few moments, then cautiously asked, So, you must have seen her aspect ability? Learn your enemy's ability, learn their flaw, learn their vices. That's how you kill them. Staring at Harper, Sonny suddenly remembered his first battle after meeting Nephis. Back then, she asked him if he had ever dissected a dead carapace scavenger to learn its weaknesses. That's what the cowardly sleeper was doing right now. Dissecting them. Even though they weren't dead. Yet. Sure, it can be used to heal. Harper's eyes gleamed. So she's a healer! Of course. Such an ability suits a Lady Changing Star very well. Everyone knows that she's an angel. Good. His first goal was achieved. Sonny had successfully created a misunderstanding, leading Harper to believe that Neff's aspect was limited to healing. There had to be other spies in the slum, of course, with them collaborating on that statement by recounting how she had healed the wounded huntress today. Gunlaug and his people would most likely believe that Changing Star had no offensive ability. Who would ever assume that her flames could both heal and destroy? Harper, meanwhile, was pouring more liquor into the cup. By the way, I always wanted to ask, do you know how Lady Nephis received her true name? Maybe because of his terrible state of mind, or maybe because of the liquor, or maybe simply because of a momentary lapse of judgment. Sonny didn't think his next words through well enough before answering. Probably the same way I did. Then he froze. Curse you! He was so preoccupied with creating a false image of Neff in Harper's mind that, for a second, he had forgotten to keep his own true identity a secret. Stupid, stupid, stupid! Not letting the panic show on his face, Sonny tried to salvage the situation by throwing his head back and laughing, creating an impression that his last statement was a joke. Luckily, Harper seemed to believe him. He laughed too, and then glanced at Sonny with humorous sparks in his eyes. However, his next words sent Sonny into a cold embrace of horror. It was as though the gates of hell opened right beneath his feet. Wishing to play along, the gaunt young man grinned and said jokingly, Oh, of course, Lord Sunless. What is your true name, then? Sonny stared at him, the smile frozen on his face. Think, how do you get out of this? But there was no way out. At least none that he could see. He was caught. The familiar pressure appeared in his mind. Slowly, Sonny became deathly pale. Harper was still grinning, waiting for the answer. His face was gaunt, tired, and full of both fear and desperate hope. He was just a weak, pitiful kid after all. The pressure was replaced by blinding pain, sending a tremble running through Sonny's body. Why did he have to ask that question? But it was too late. What happened couldn't be changed. Like a cornered beast, Sonny could only think of one thing. Harper finally sensed that something was wrong. His eyes widened. Son? How to survive. Just a second before the pain overwhelmed his limits and forced out an answer, Sonny suddenly leaned forward, picked up the crude iron knife, and stabbed it through the poor young man's heart. Chapter 162. Lost from Light. Pushing the knife into Harper's weak body, Sonny lunged forward. The flimsy wooden table flew aside and shattered into splinters once it hit the wall. With his other hand, he violently grabbed the young man's face and pressed him onto the floor, making sure that no sound would escape from his lips. Harper's wide eyes were full of pain and terror, staring at Sonny with a silent but deafening question. Why? Feeling hot blood streaming down his hand, Sonny finally let the pain of the flaw overwhelm him. His whisper was hoarse and barely audible. Lost from light. I am lost from light. Harper's trembling fingers found his face and smeared it with blood, which then mixed with tears. He weakly tried to push Sonny away, but there was no strength in his arms anymore. Biting his lips hard enough to break the skin, Sonny held the gaunt young man down and twisted the knife, praying for all of this to be over soon. Don't look at me. Please don't look at me. Finally, Harper's terrified, accusing eyes grew still and lightless. Sonny could feel the beating of his heart stop through the thin fabric of the young man's robe. Making sure that Harper was indeed dead, he finally let go of the knife and crawled away. Oh, gods! As though summoned by these words, the voice of the spell whispered into his ear. You have slain Dreamer Harper. Your shadow grows stronger. Contorted in a painful spasm, Sonny bent over and violently threw up. Then he weakly fell on the floor and tried to wipe his face, only to realize that he was spreading blood all over it. I killed him. I just killed a real human. A strange stillness took hold of Sonny. Sitting on the cold stones, he stared at the corpse of the young man that he had just killed and struggled to form a cohesive thought. After a while, he finally succeeded. Too much. Oh, this is too much. All of this was too much for him. Why did he have to go through all of this? The slave caravan, the forgotten shore, changing star, and now Harper. What sin had he committed to have to go through this nightmare? Was he actually already dead and imprisoned in the depths of hell? Bullshit, he deserved it. Sonny gritted his teeth and forced himself to concentrate on that thought. Why do you even feel guilty? The bastard was going to sell you out to Gunlaug. He knew that he was helping to kill you. And not just you alone. Neff too. And Cassie. But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that he had the right to kill Harper, deep down he could not accept it. There were a million ways to deal with this timid, pitiful spy. No, there was another reason. Come on now. There's no one else here. Why don't you be honest with yourself for once? Just admit it. Don't you dare become a hypocrite. Sonny grimaced and ground his teeth against each other. Say it. Reluctantly, he opened his mouth and whispered. I killed him because I wanted to survive. I killed him because it was easy. And just like that, he suddenly felt better. What's the big deal? He was already a murderer anyway. He was planning to help Nephis kill hundreds of people. Affected by the irony of the situation, Sonny barely stopped himself from laughing. He didn't want to make too much noise. Breaking that table was already a mistake. What if someone comes to check on that commotion? That would be bad. That would be embarrassing. Right. What was he going to do with the body? Instead of coming up with an answer, Sonny leaned forward and threw up again. When he sat straight after a while, the door of the hut was open. And there, in the doorframe, his face pale, stood none other than Castor. With a stunned expression on his face, the proud legacy was taking in the sight. The broken table, the smell of alcohol in the air, the bloodied body with a knife sticking out of its chest, and disheveled Sonny kneeling on the floor, his hands and face smeared with fresh blood. Oh no, this is not... However, no words came to his mind. No matter what he would say, the situation was not going to appear any better. Looking him straight in the eyes, Castor asked with horror in his voice, "Sonny, what did you do?" Sonny blinked and stared at the handsome young man. After a few moments, he opened his mouth and said, "What do you think? I killed the bastard." His voice was calm and nonchalant. It didn't matter how Sonny felt inside. In front of Castor, he couldn't show any weakness. He didn't trust the proud scion of the Han Lee clan one bit. There had always been something off about him. So, if there is ever a time for acting, it was now. Especially because, unlike everyone else in the slum, Castor already knew that Sonny wasn't as useless as everyone believed. He had noted ever since that night when the three of them fought a devil together. "Killed the... Why did you kill him?" Sonny stood up and shrugged. He was asking too many questions. Castor opened his mouth, stunned, then closed it again. After a few moments, he suddenly frowned. What kind of questions? It seemed as though he had realized something. Come to think of it, what was he even doing here? "Oh, you know, do I know Nephis well, what her ability is, how did you get her true name, stuff like that." Without giving Castor the ability to react, Sonny wiped his hand with a bit of seaweed and added, "Actually, this guy, Harper, was sent over to spy on us by Tasai. I caught him making a report to a castle guard officer this morning." Castor remained silent for a while, then asked quietly, "Do you have any proof of that?" Sonny glared at him and raised an eyebrow. "Is my word not proof enough?" A wild thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Will I have to kill Castor too? Would he even be able to, if it came to that? Not likely. Why, you don't believe me? Bad. Bad. The situation was really bad. Depending on Castor's next words, Sonny could find himself in a sea of trouble, and he was powerless to do anything about it. Anxious and uneasy, he stared at Castor. The proud legacy lingered. After a while, he came inside and closed the door behind him. "No, I believe you. Actually, I suspected this kid myself. That's why I came here after hearing that the two of you were seen going somewhere together. But, Sonny, the others might not think the same." He smelled the air and grimaced. "I am sorry to say that, but you have a reputation for having a bad temper. With alcohol added into the mix and no proof to connect Harper to the castle, you can see how this did not look good. That piece of crap." Sonny scowled, trying to pretend that he was calm. He saw where this was going. "So, what are you going to do?" Castor gripped his shoulder. Then, in a serious and grave voice, he said, "What else? I will help you conceal everything, of course. We are comrades, after all. But, Sonny, no one can even know what you have done here. Especially Lady Nephis. This will be our secret, all right?" Saying that, he looked Sonny right in the eyes and smiled. Chapter 163. The Past. Sonny stared at Castor with a grim expression. Despite the amiable smile and reassuring voice, he knew what the handsome legacy was doing. He grew up in the outskirts, after all. Castor had said, "I will help you." But what he actually meant was, I will own you. Because there was no better leverage than a gruesome secret. This help of his was going to come at a price. But what choice did Sonny have, really? Unless he was ready to fight and kill Castor right there and then, thus silencing the only witness of his crime forever, he couldn't refuse. Plus, what Castor thought was going to happen and what would really happen was not as set in stone as it seemed. As long as Sonny was alive, there was hope of turning things around, somehow. He just had to get through this one step at a time. Sonny forced out a smile. Thank you, Castor. I won't forget it. Then he glanced at the dead body lying at his feet and took a step back, escaping the quickly growing puddle of blood. His face remained calm, but a small, almost imperceptible shiver ran through his body. So, what do we do now? The proud legacy lingered, then said in a solemn tone, First things first, we can't let anyone see you like this. Wait here for a while. I'll bring something for you to clean yourself. Sonny sighed. He didn't really want to stay anywhere near Harper, but Castor was right. Walking around covered in blood was a bad idea. And then what? Castor hesitated. Then we will need to get rid of the body. But it won't be easy to do without being noticed. If not by slum rats, then by guards. Don't worry, though. I'll think of something. Just wait for me to return. Sonny hesitated, wondering if he could trust the legacy. What was going to stop him from returning with a crowd of people? But no, having Sonny in his pocket would benefit Castor more than getting rid of him completely. Still, he sent the shadow to keep an eye on things after the handsome young man went away. Left alone with the corpse, Sonny sighed and sat on the floor, resting his back against the flimsy wall of the hut. He was so tired. The night was slowly descending on the ruins, drowning everything in comforting darkness. Of course, he could still see the bloodied body lying motionless on the stones beside him. For the first time, Sonny wished that his eyes weren't able to pierce through the shadows. Harper's eyes were still open, staring at him accusingly. I'm stuck with you forever, aren't I? Without even looking into the soul sea, Sonny knew that a new shadow had joined the silent ranks of every creature he had ever killed. All he could do was wait. Time slowly crawled. It was taking Castor a long time to gather everything needed without raising any suspicion. He had to avoid prying eyes and waste a lot of time conversing with people who constantly wanted to win his attention. At some point, even Cassie talked to him. Hey, Castor, have you seen Sonny? Away from their lodge, sitting on the floor near the corpse of a young man he had killed, Sonny smiled darkly and listened to what kind of excuse the legacy would come up with to account for his absence. After a while, his thoughts began to wander. He listened to the sound of rain falling on the stones outside and scowled. Rain always put him in a bad mood. Because of it, Sonny was always reminded of the past. Unlike Nepthys, whose past was clouded in mystery and screamed of tragedy, he came from a simple background. His story was more mundane than tragic, a trivial story of unfortunate people living hard and bitterly in a dying world. Sonny's parents were both menial workers. They were poor, but not destitute. His dad was employed by one of the numerous maintenance crews that took care of the city's outer barriers. His mom worked in an underground factory that produced air filtration systems. Together, their income was barely enough to afford a small cell in one of the human hives in the outskirts. Several months after his sister, Rain, was born, when Sonny was around 4, his father was killed in a work accident, which was not a rare occurrence among the city maintenance workers. 3 years after that, his mother got sick and eventually passed away. Factory workers like her often got sick and died due to the harsh conditions, so it wasn't a rare outcome either. Sonny and Rain were sent to a government child care facility. His sister was young and cute, so she was eventually adopted. Sonny, however, was older and had behavioral problems, which made him pretty much completely undesirable. After enduring a few years in a series of increasingly vile foster homes, he finally managed to run away and learn how to survive on the streets of the outskirts. Out there on the streets, there were a lot of kids just like him, who had to do all sorts of distasteful things every day just to live to see another sunrise. However, even then, most of them didn't last long. It took a very special kind of creature to survive there. Sonny was one such creature. as a part of this was pure luck, and part of it was that he was smart. But mostly it was because he had a goal. Sonny refused to die before finding his sister. Somehow he had convinced himself that she was waiting for him to find and save her. One day, they were going to live happily again, like a family, together. This misguided goal kept him alive more than anything else. Of course, it didn't end well. Nothing ever did in this damn world. Sitting just a few centimeters away from a puddle of human blood, Sonny chuckled and rubbed his face. Was there even such a thing as a happy ending? What is taking that bastard so long? Granted, he knew exactly where Castor was and what he was doing. Currently, he was raising his hand to open the door of Harper's hut. Sonny tiredly picked himself up from the floor and shook off the weight of reminiscence. What was the point of remembering the past? He had to survive the future. Chapter 164. Farewell. Castor brought him water, strips of cloth, and a crude tunic. While Sonny was washing the blood off his body, the proud legacy carefully moved Harper's corpse into a corner, buried it under the pile of seaweed thatch, and wiped the blood off the floor as much as he could. This way, an accidental glance inside the hut would not reveal too much. Of course, even a little bit of scrutiny, and the signs of what had happened here would become apparent. While doing all this, Castor was speaking. The easiest way to get rid of a corpse is to simply toss it off the platform. With luck, it won't land on the road, but even if it does, no one would pay it a lot of attention. People die all the time out here in the Dark City, especially those living in the outer settlement. He paused, then continued. However, we can't do that, because Harper isn't just a random slum rat, but someone who is working for the Bright Lord. The guards will become interested in his sudden death, and they'll use it to create trouble for you and Lady Nephis. So we need to make him disappear completely. That won't be easy. Sonny glanced at him and frowned. What's the big deal? I can just carry him down the hill and dump the body somewhere in the ruins. It's night outside, no one will see anything. Castor shook his head. Castle Guard has various types of observers watching the road day and night. You will be noticed, unless someone persuades them to look the other way, of course. He sighed. It won't be cheap, but I can make it happen. Tomorrow after sunset, you'll have about an hour to carry the body to the ruins and return. Sorry, but I can't buy you more time. This will wipe what little shards I have left already. His voice sounded as though the handsome young man was genuinely concerned for his comrade, but in reality, he was just reiterating just how much Sonny owed him now. And if that message was not enough, he could always threaten to reveal the secret of how Harper died in the future. Castor had him in the palm of his hand. Sonny smiled darkly. And what do I do until then? The legacy shrugged. Just act natural and try not to speak to anyone. You're kind of a loner as it is. No one will suspect anything. After that, he thought for a few moments and added, No one should enter this hut for a long while. Harper lived in the castle for these past few months, so people in the slum won't notice his absence yet. Neither will guards, since he made a report recently. We should be fine. Sonny stared at him with a strange expression. What? He shook his head. No, nothing. I'm just wondering how many bodies did you make disappear already? Castor frowned. This is my first, actually. In the Dark City, it is usually more advantageous to leave a body somewhere where everyone can see. Made sense? Why kill someone if not to make others think twice before attacking you in the future? Sonny was a real amateur when it came to murder. He really could not compete with the legacies. Just like that, they left the pitiful hut behind and returned to the lodge. With no one paying him any attention, Sonny returned to his room and sat quietly on his narrow cot. He thought that he wouldn't be able to sleep this night, tormented by both the knowledge of what Nephis was planning and the memories of Harper dying by his hand. But in the end, his exhausted consciousness slipped into oblivion as soon as his head touched the pillow. In the morning, he woke up with a start, expecting a crowd of furious slum dwellers to be rushing inside, all eager to... Well, what could they really do? If push came to shove, very few of them could actually harm him. But no one was there. After hesitating for a while, he decided to act as he would as on any other day. Leaving his room, Sonny walked outside to wash his face. Neff's little helpers either greeted or ignored him, just like usual. Their smiles were friendly and fleeting. No one looked at him twice. Strangely disturbed, Sunny escaped the lodge and looked up at the sky. Nothing had changed. Everything was the same as it had been yesterday, and every day before that. How could this be? He had violently murdered someone, but no one seemed to care. The world had moved on without Harper, indifferent to the pain and horror that was now frozen forever in the dead eyes of the timid, pitiful young man. Even the guards did not seem to notice the disappearance of their spy. Sunny rubbed his face, hiding a pained grimace. His head hurt with a terrible migraine. If they don't care, why should I? Forget about that fool. But he did care. Irrational as it was, he felt compelled to mourn the death of his victim, even if he was the only one who would. Maybe because the situation was eerily identical to how he had always imagined his own death to happen, utterly unnoticed. Discarded and forgotten, with not a single soul to care that he had ever existed. Pathetic. Returning inside, Sunny entered the room and sat on the cot, staring at the wall. He spent most of the day there, going out only once to pretend to train with the Midnight Shard. While he was repeating the katas, he thought he caught sight of Nephis observing the movements of his sword with a frown on her face. But a second later she was distracted and drawn away by the never-ending torrent of tasks required of her. Good riddance, go chat with Castor, see if I care. His sudden anger surprised Sunny. Well, at least it was better than the grim apathy that reigned over him this whole day. What's wrong with my mind lately? It's like I'm back on the Ashen Barrow. Frowning, he dismissed the Midnight Shard and returned to his room. However, someone was waiting for him there. It was Cassie. The blind girl stood silently with her back to the door, hiding the wooden staff in her hands. Her face was unusually stiff. It almost looked bleak. Sunny's heart skipped a beat. Did she find out? Forcing a fake grin, he made his voice sound cheerful and said, "Oh, hey Cass, do you want something?" She turned to him and, after a moment of hesitation, smiled. However, something about her smile was off. It was almost as though it was as forced as his own. The blind girl lingered, then said, "No, nothing in particular." Sunny blinked a couple of times. What's up with her today? Meanwhile, Cassie raised her hand and found his shoulder. "No, actually, I have a present for you." He raised his eyebrow. "A present?" She nodded. In the next moment, a spark of energy suddenly traveled from her body into his. Sunny flinched. "You have received a memory. Endless Spring. Wasn't it that pretty glass bottle of hers, one that contained an almost endless amount of water? Why was she giving it to him? Why are you gifting me this all of a sudden?" She was silent for a few moments, then gently shook her head. "I just wanted to. Why, can't I give you something after everything that you've done for us?" Sunny hesitated. "I guess you can. I just didn't expect it." Cassie gripped his shoulder and remained motionless for a weirdly long amount of time. Then she looked away and said, her voice light and even, "We'll meet again soon, Sunny." Weirdo. He patted her hand and said, a little embarrassed, "Of course we will. Where would I go? This lodge is too small for us not to bump into each other all the time anyway." She slowly removed her hand and chuckled. "Yeah, you're right. Of course. I'll go now." With that, she turned away and headed for the door. Sunny stared at her back and shrugged. "All right, bye." What has gotten into her? Reaching the doorway, Cassie froze for a second. Without turning her head and letting him see her face, she lingered for a while, then quietly said, "Goodbye, Sunny." Chapter 165. Power. For the rest of the day, Sunny had nothing to do but count the hours until sunset. When the night descended, he would have to return to the scene of the crime he had committed, retrieve the body of his victim, and carry it into the ruins under the cover of darkness. How did it come to this? Alone in his tiny room, he stared at the wall and waited. Soon the fear of going into the dark city at night overpowered the bleak and hollow feeling that reigned over his soul. People rarely risk leaving the hill after the dark. In the starless void of the forgotten shore, any source of light was bound to attract the attention of creatures that no human would ever want to meet. Countless horrors stalked the streets of the city at night. Only a madman would risk entering the ruins after the sun was gone. And of course, there were plenty of madmen in the dark city. Sonny, at least, didn't need any light. He also knew the area surrounding the bright castle well enough to avoid most dangers. The weeks he had spent learning from Effie didn't go to waste. I should be fine. With the shadows hiding his every movement, Sonny was sure of his ability to at least run away should something happen. Still, with each passing minute, his heart felt colder and colder. When the shadow of the Crimson Spire drowned the world and colored his thoughts with the eerie feeling of dread, he gritted his teeth. It's almost time. However, before the sun completely disappeared, another unexpected guest appeared at the doorstep of his room. Looking at Sonny with a scowl, Nephis gestured for him to stand up and said in an even tone, "Come with me." Sonny's heart skipped a bit. What? What does she want? Suppressing the sickly fear of being caught, he lingered for a few moments, then slowly stood up and followed Changing Star out of the lodge. Together, the two of them walked to a secluded part of the slum. Neff remained silent, not even looking in his direction. She seemed calm, like always. Sonny, however, struggled to keep himself from panicking. Various thoughts, one darker than the other, found their way into his head. Did that bastard Castor tell her everything? Finally, they reached the remote alley where no one would have been able to overhear their conversation. It was filled with nothing but the crimson light of sunset and deep shadows. Turning around, Changing Star looked at him with a frown. Sonny met her gaze, his face grim. He felt as though he was staring at his judge and executioner. I've seen you practicing with the sword today. Your moves were weak and aimless. It was as if you had lost all clarity. What were you thinking about? Sonny slowly exhaled. So, that's what this was about. She didn't know anything. She just picked up the turmoil raging in his mind. He should have felt relieved, but for some reason, Sonny felt anger rising in his chest instead. With a crooked smile, he looked away and answered, "Murder? I was thinking about murder." Nephis tilted her head, waiting for an explanation. Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then said, his voice strangely cold, "You once told me that the essence of combat is murder, didn't you?" She gave him a nod. He stared at her, then said, "Well, how come you know so much about murder, Neff? Huh? I wanted to ask you since the day you cut off Andel's head without so much as batting an eye. You are out here preaching about how we all are fellow humans, not some beast. Was Andel not human?" She scowled. "Is this what it's all about?" Sonny gritted his teeth. "It's a part of it." Nephis was silent for a long time. At some point, she absent-mindedly raised one arm and rubbed her neck. Finally, she said, "It's not that I have murdered a lot of people. It's that a lot of people have tried to murder me." Sonny blinked. "Why would anyone want to kill you?" She smiled. "Why? All kinds of reasons, really. My family was really powerful once, don't you remember? But power, it's a dangerous thing, Sonny. You can't reach its peak without creating a lot of enemies. And when your power disappears one day, all those enemies remain." Turning her face away, she said with her usual indifferent voice, "I think I was, 5, 6 years old when someone tried to kill me for the first time. It was my nanny. She led me to an empty room, put her hands around my neck, and tried to strangle me. I thought that it was a game, for the first few seconds at least." Neff looked at him with white sparks dancing in her eyes. "That was how I learned what weakness is, and when my teacher, who happened to walk by, rushed inside and used his aspect ability to kill her, that was how I learned what strength is. So yes, I'm not a stranger to severed heads. Sonny, is that what you wanted to know?" He stared at her, then slowly shook his head. How frightened she must have felt, how powerless. Powerlessness. He knew how it felt all too well. Somehow, Sonny had never imagined that proud and indomitable Changing Star had tasted it too, was shaped by it. Just like he was. Meanwhile, Nephis smiled, but there was no humor in her eyes. "So then, what did you want to know? Huh, Sonny? What is this all about? Do you think I haven't noticed the way you were staring at me ever since we fought the Spire Messenger? Come clean with it. You owe me at least this much." He glared at her for a long time, a storm of emotions written on his pale, grim face. Finally, making a decision, Sonny gritted his teeth and said, I want to know what your real goal is. I want to know if it's all worth it. Chapter 166. Light and Shadows. Changing Star frowned. There was a hint of surprise visible in her cold gray eyes. My goal? Isn't it obvious? She gestured to the slum that surrounded them and the magnificent castle towering above it. I'm trying to help these people. What else? Sonny sighed. Then turning his face away, he asked, Hey, have I ever told you about my sister? Nephis blinked. No? Why bring this up all of a sudden? He smiled wistfully. I just was reminded of her recently, so I thought I'd share. You see, our parents died when we were little. She got adopted, but I ended up on the streets. Life wasn't really sweet for me. In fact, it was nothing but unsavory and bitter. So, young as I was, I simply imagined that it was the same for her. That's why I got obsessed with the idea of finding her. I had this fantasy in my head, of saving and protecting her, becoming a family again. Sonny grimaced. But how could a penniless undesirable like me find anyone? You know how city databases are. Even if they're functional, unsealing anything requires you to be a citizen and one of a considerable rank too. However, I was ready to do anything to accomplish my goal, so I saved up money. A street kid can't earn much, but even then, I saved up as much as I could. A dark expression appeared on his face. Even if I had almost nothing to eat, I would keep putting away the pathetic amount of credits I had earned through doing all kinds of horrid crap. And after 4 or 5 years of this, by the time I was nearly 17, I finally had enough to hire a private investigator. He smiled. You see, there was this detective who sometimes hired us nobodies to gather information for him. His services weren't cheap, but I trusted him, or in him, at least. So I gave all my money to that guy and told him to find my sister. And you know what? He did. One day, about a month after we made the deal, he gave me a piece of paper with an address written on it. So I went there. Nephis hesitated for a few moments, then asked in a quiet voice, So, what happened? Did you meet your sister? Sonny rubbed his face, glanced at the sky, and said, Sort of. I actually met her near the tram terminal. Only at that time I didn't recognize her. You see, despite my lofty ideas of being her savior, I couldn't even really remember what she looked like. There was this girl, around 12 years old, wearing a tidy school uniform. She was walking in the same direction as me. I only realized that it was her after she entered the house from the address. He was silent for a while, then continued, his voice strangely emotionless. It was already dark. I think it was raining. The house was situated in a really nice district. They actually had the whole house to themselves. Just one family living in it. Can you imagine? Well, I guess you can. Anyway, there was even a lawn and a window. A big window that shined light outside. Watching them through that window was almost like watching a television show. Sonny remembered the splendor of it, his own embarrassing astonishment, and tried to smile. However, he failed. Standing in the shadows just outside the edge of that light, I observed her family for a while. She had parents who loved her and treated her well. She had real food, and enough of it to never go hungry. She had pretty clothes and expensive textbooks. She even had cute younger siblings. And they were all smiling, laughing, and having a great time together. Neff looked at him and asked, So, what did you do? Sonny didn't answer immediately. Instead, he remembered how he just stood there, watching those happy people. How he looked down at his own frail body, his dirty and ragged clothes, the bruises on his bloodied knuckles, and realized how utterly out of place he was in that picture. After years of dreaming of finding his sister and saving her, he was faced with the simple fact that she never really needed him. She probably didn't even remember that he existed. More than that, returning into her life would not bring anything good to her. He didn't have anything pleasant or beneficial to offer. He could only make things worse. Out there on that dark and rainy night, while Sonny was standing in the shadows, something in his heart was extinguished forever. Something inside him died. No matter what kind of situation he would find himself in after this, Nothing would really compare to the darkness he felt in that single moment. After remaining motionless for a long time, he slowly backed away, turned around, and walked into the darkness. A few days after that, he began showing the first symptoms of being infected by the nightmare spell, and the rest was history. Shaking off the unpleasant memories, Sonny pretended to be carefree and shrugged. I did the only selfless thing that I have ever done. I turned around and went away. Do you know why? Nephis slowly shook her head. Sonny grinned, the anger finally finding its way into his eyes. Because even a cretin like me was able to realize that the person he wanted to save didn't need his saving. So, please tell me, Neph, why is it that you, with all your intelligence and clarity, can't seem to do the same? She stared at him, a deep frown appearing on her face. Are you implying that I lied about my intention to help these people? If so, you are wrong. Sonny clenched his fists. Before he could stop himself, words flew out of his mouth. No. To be completely honest with himself, he had to admit that he simply did not want to stop them. He was too exhausted, hurting, and shaken to keep playing this game with Neph. It was time to bring everything to light. Maybe then he would be able to regain clarity. Glaring at Changing Star, Sonny spat. Fuck you, Neph. She blinked. What? He smiled crookedly. I said go fuck yourself with that bullshit, Saint Nephis. You might have fooled everyone else, but I know you. I know you better than anyone else. So I don't buy your whole savior act even for a second. Sonny repeated her gesture, pointing at the surrounding hovels. Help these people? Please, what are you going to help them with? Help them turn into corpses? You and I both know how this ends. Cassie already told us. Fire and rivers of blood, right? Is that what you're planning? Nephis stared at him, a dark expression written on her ivory face. Her cold gray eyes weren't calm anymore. Finally, there was a burning emotion in them. Was it confusion? Pain? Disappointment? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Then Changing Star slowly shook her head. Finally, she seemed to find the right words. Looking Sonny right in the eyes, she lightly raised her chin and said, Fine, you got me. Chapter 167. Unforgivable. Sonny stared at Nephis, stunned by her answer. He didn't expect her to admit it so easily. Meanwhile, she just shrugged. What? Was I supposed to deny it? Why should I? You were the one who was obsessed with lies, Sonny, not me. The corner of Changing Star's mouth twitched. Actually, I have to thank you. If it wasn't for you, I would have never learned how to deceive people so easily. I had a very sheltered upbringing for obvious reasons. Communicating with others had always been something I knew very little about. She smiled darkly. How fortunate it was to meet you, of all people, on this forsaken shore. Lucky me, right? Sonny blinked. What was she talking about? He remembered how, during their journey to the Dark City, Nephis had tried to mimic Cassie in how she spoke to people. Had she been studying him, too? Neph took a step forward and pierced him with an intense, burning gaze. No one survives in the dream realm alone. I know that I won't be an exception to this rule, so I watched Cassie and you and tried my hardest to learn from you both. That's when I noticed that nothing you ever said, or did, was true. Wasn't it? Crap. Sonny felt a cold shiver running down his spine. She scoffed. No matter what happened, you somehow always managed to keep your real thoughts, desires, and reasons hidden. I've never seen anyone so adept at deception. Congratulations, Sonny. The mind games you played with us were almost as devious as the mental hex of the Soul Devourer. It was nothing short of inspiring. Changing Star paused and shook her head. You can even easily turn truths into lies. How brilliant. I never even knew that such a thing was possible. Silly me. I did know a lot of things before I met you. She smiled. So you see, while you were learning how to use a sword from me, I was learning how to use people from you. So please, Sonny, accept my sincere gratitude. I could not have wished for a better teacher. Without you, none of this would have been possible. Nephis raised her hand and stabbed a finger at him. Then, with anger in her voice, she spat. So where do you get the audacity to blame me for doing the same thing you do to everyone you ever meet? Sunny trembled. Was she telling the truth? Did Neff actually learn how to be this manipulative and vile from him? Oh no. Someone that inexperienced couldn't have found a worse role model even if they tried. What a cruel twist of fate, to be sent into the dream realm together with a damaged, vicious man like him. Sunny gritted his teeth. That's not the same. Changing Star scowled. How is what I am doing different? I haven't told a single lie to these people. I just gave them enough truth to make them deceive themselves, just like you taught me. But what, now that it was turned around on you, it is suddenly not fair? Now you won't settle for anything less than the whole truth? She smirked. Fine, I'll tell you. Yes, you are right. There's going to be fire and rivers of blood. That is my plan. So what? How is it worse than this pathetic, hopeless existence? It isn't. I'm going to kill Gunlaug. After he is dead, the Bright Castle will become engulfed in a civil war, with each of the 5 lieutenants vying for the throne. I am going to kill them too, and when I am the last one standing... Her eyes glistened. I will gather those of us who remain alive and make a road of bones for the lucky few to reach the gateway. That is my promise. That is the salvation I offer to the people of the Dark City. A chance to return to the real world or die like a human should, standing tall and with a sword in their hand, instead of living in fear like a rat. I thought that you, of all people, would understand. Sunny stared at her in disbelief. How could she be so nonchalant about the idea of causing the deaths of so many people? Had their lives no value in her eyes? But then he realized that he was looking at it all wrong. He was looking at it from his own perspective. The perspective of someone who is used to surviving at all cost, to putting survival above all else. However, that was how his old self had viewed the world. After coming to the Forgotten Shore, Sunny had learned that there were things more valuable than staying alive. And he learned it from Neff. To her, a life that was not worth living was much worse than a worthy death. Maybe, in her mind, she really was trying to help these people. But who gave her the right to make that decision on their behalf? Shaking his head, he whispered, Is it really so terrible to live here? Is Gunlock really so bad that you would rather see all of us die than let us remain under his rule? A dark expression appeared on Changing Star's face. With cold contempt ringing in her voice, she said, Gunlaug has done many despicable things, but I won't judge him for those. Who knows if any of us would have done any better? Keeping 1,000 hopeless people alive in this hell is the kind of task that can turn a saint into a demon. No, there's only one crime he committed that I can never forgive. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Which one? She lowered her chin and gritted her teeth. It's that he gave up. She looked at Sunny and said, her voice full of intensity, It's that he never even tried to reach the gateway. With so many years to prepare and hundreds of powerful fighters under his command, do you really think that there was nothing he could do to enter the Crimson Spire? No, he simply changed his mind. Why return if you can live like a king here in the Dark City? He abandoned his duty as an Awakened and submitted to the spell. And because of how he reigned, destroying people before they grew powerful enough to threaten his rule, Gunlaug also prevented anyone else from trying. However, Sunny glimpsed something else from what Nephis had said, a hint of her true motivation. The words she chose to condemn Gunlaug were just too peculiar. Despite the fact that the Bright Lord had committed all sorts of atrocious acts and caused the deaths, humiliation, and sorrow of countless people, the thing that enraged Changing Star the most was not his corruption and cruelty, but something entirely different. The fact that he had submitted to the spell and failed to complete his trial. Considering which family she hailed from, was this the key to her mysterious goal? Frowning, Sunny asked, Don't you think that maybe he just wasn't willing to see hundreds of people die? All these young men and women living in the outer settlement in the Bright Castle. How many of them are you ready to sacrifice to achieve your goal? He grew silent, afraid that her answer would confirm his suspicion. Neff straightened her back and glanced at him. Once again, her eyes were firm and calm. Without pausing to think, she said, not a shadow of a doubt in her voice, "All of them, of course." Chapter 168. Outside. Sunny grimaced and turned away, feeling a terrible headache. The sun was almost gone, and the night was following in his footsteps. He didn't have much time left. With a desperate smile, Sunny looked at Changing Star and asked, "What can be so damn important? What can be so valuable that you are ready to condemn everyone here to death?" He shook his head, guessing that he already knew. "Don't tell me that it's some stupid crap like bringing the glory of the Immortal Flame Clan back. Duty of the Awakened? What, you give a terrible oath to become the first human to conquer the fourth nightmare, like your father conquered the third and your grandfather the second? Or even worse, is it something even more foolish? Are you planning to save the damn world?" Nephis stared at him for a few moments, and then grinned. Something dangerous and unfamiliar awakened in her eyes. No, not completely unfamiliar. It was the same strange, maniacal glimmer he had seen once before, right after saying the three strange words to her: Aster, Song, Veil. Back then, for a few moments, Changing Star had turned from a calm and composed young woman into someone he wasn't sure he recognized anymore. With a soft chuckle, Neff shook her head. "Save the world? No, I'm not going to save the world, Sunny." Then the smile disappeared from her face, and white flame suddenly ignited in the depths of her cold, gray eyes. With dark and frightening conviction, she said, "I'm going to destroy it." Her words echoed in the darkness, making Sunny feel an irrational feeling of dread. He stared at her, both failing to comprehend and afraid to believe in what she had just heard. Destroy? The world? What? Deeply inhaling the cool air, Changing Star looked up at the sky. "This world, Sunny. This cursed place. The dream realm. No, I won't be the first one to conquer the fourth nightmare. I will be the first one to conquer every nightmare. I'll go through them one after another, destroying anything and anyone who stands in my way. And when I get to the heart of the nightmare spell, I'm going to obliterate every part of it. I'm going to rip it to shreds. I'm going to decimate and bring it to ruin." She looked him in the eyes and said, "You think Gunlauga can stop me? You think a fallen terror can stop me? Those three ghouls can stop me? No, Sunny, nothing will stop me. Anyone who dares will die. I'll kill them all." Taking a step back, Sunny stared at her with wide eyes. He shivered, feeling something cold touch the back of his neck. Then he grimaced and asked, a hint of anguish in his voice, "Why? Why do you want to destroy this spell so much?" A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. After a few moments, she simply said, "Because I hate it." Sunny blinked, stunned by the simplicity of that answer. If it was someone else, he would have thought that they were lying. But Nephis lived in a strange, stark world. She did things simply because she wanted to, and apparently wanted to destroy an eternal, omnipotent existence simply because she hated it. Why the hell not? He closed his eyes and whispered, "You are actually insane." Neff smiled. What does it mean to be insane in a world that has gone mad? I would be wary of anyone who remained perfectly sane in this hell. Then she sighed. "So, are we done here? Or do you have more questions? The sun is almost gone, so you'd better hurry up and ask them." Sunny shook his head and said, his voice hoarse, Yeah, Neff, I'm done." With that, he slowly turned around and took a step forward. Left behind, Nephis frowned. "Where are you going? Come back here." He waved a hand and said in a suppressed tone, refusing to turn his head, "Sorry, I have an errand to run. We'll talk some other time." Her frown deepened. Looking at his back, Changing Star gritted her teeth and called, "I said come back, Sunny. This conversation isn't over. Come back here right now." But there was no answer. Sunny had already disappeared into the shadows, leaving her standing alone in the alley that was brightly lit by the last light of the dying sunset. Sometime later, Sunny was walking through the ruins, Harper's dead body weighing on his shoulder. The young man was very gaunt back before he had been killed, so it wasn't much of a burden. Physically, at least. It was the early hour of the night. Surrounded by nothing but darkness, Sunny was left alone with his thoughts and emotions. But strangely, both his heart and mind were empty. He couldn't be bothered to think or feel anything right now. It was just all too much and too sudden. Plus, he would much rather concentrate on not stumbling on some horrific monster. Ending up eaten by a nightmare creature right now would be very ironic, but still unpleasant. He felt guilty about murdering Harper, but not enough to die while trying to dispose of the body. He would much prefer not to die for his sins. Luckily, the area he was traversing was familiar to Sunny. He knew which streets were comparatively safe, and which he needed to avoid, where the really horrible monsters lived, and where he could pass without being sent by anything. Finally, judging that he was far away into the ruins, he found a partially collapsed house, climbed over the rubble, then hesitated for a few moments, and threw the corpse inside. Harper's gaunt body rolled down the rocks and disappeared into the interior of the house, where no one would ever see it. Here, done. That part, at least, was finished. It was time to go back. Sunny turned around and stared at the distant silhouette of the tall hill, with the magnificent castle standing on its top. Right now, hundreds of people were sleeping in there, either in the pitiful hovels of the outer settlement or in the safe and warm rooms of the ancient stronghold. Neff, Cassie, and Effie were there. Horace, Gemma, and the Gunlaug, the Bright Lord, were there too, and many, many others. And most of them were going to die. Looking at the white marble walls of the castle, Sunny could see his future vividly. Watching helplessly as Changing Star builds her sect, helping her defend herself from Gunlaug, going on hunts, being invisible once he comes back, afraid to get close to anyone, lest the same thing that happened to Harper repeats itself, up until the moment everything ends in bloodshed and terror. Castor was there too, waiting to use his leverage over Sunny to make him his obedient minion. Sunny wasn't deceived by the amiable personality of the handsome legacy. He knew that nothing good was going to come of accepting his help. In the end, he just stood in the shadows and looked into the distance, at the tiny human enclave that persevered against all odds in the cursed nightmare of the forgotten shore like a lone glimmer of light. After remaining motionless for a long time, Sunny quietly sighed, turned his back to it, and slowly walked into the darkness.